Good evening, citizens of Portsmouth, city staff, invited guests, and my colleagues on city council. Call to order the public work session for today, and I would ask that all my colleagues that are present, please note your presence electronically.
Oh, 5 members of city council are present.
Thank you, ma'am. And Madam Interim City Manager, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
You have the floor, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to start this evening's public work session topics with the planning, the DDC appeal from the Planning Commission. Is Mr. Underwood here? Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please come up, and we can start the proceedings.
Hi, good evening. My name is Timothy Underwood.
Excuse me, Mr. Underwood.
Yes.
Welcome, sir. Thank you
Ma'am.
for coming. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Again, my name is Tim Underwood, and I lead a nonprofit organization. We are Hope with Love, and we have a vision to provide affordable housing to 2 veteran families who have formerly experienced homelessness in the downtown. We have gone through the planning process with the Downtown Design Committee and the Planning Office, and we have applied for a certificate of appropriateness, which we were denied. And we are here for an appeal. I would just like to share up front that we are appealing based on just the continuously, I would say, the stream of challenges that have evolved, especially as it relates to a moving goal line. The expectations that were set have continuously been moved. We would meet those expectations, and then the goal line would move further, creating a very negative experience for our nonprofit organization to obtain the approval to proceed. I do also want to add that I was in this very chamber several weeks ago where the chief of police was sharing, really appealing for solutions, looking for solutions to reduce the crime here in Portsmouth. And we firmly believe, our nonprofit organization firmly believes.
Point of order. The speaker is talking about crime. I don't think that's the subject matter of what we're discussing now.
Sure, I can.
Thank you, Councilman Moody. There is a point of order, sir. And when you're speaking, it's recommended that you speak specific to the proposal that you've put forth.
You bet, Mayor. Will do.
Okay? Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor.
The challenge to what he was speaking to, he wasn't just speaking about crime in general. I thought he was connecting crime to his project and how his project somehow will help address the issue of crime. So I think he was on point and should be allowed to continue his train of thought.
Thank you, sir. I've already ruled on the point of order. Sir, if you would continue.
Yep, will do. And just noted, as it relates to jobs and opportunities that businesses and nonprofits like ours bring to the city of Portsmouth, the experience that we have personally had, we could easily see would deter other businesses and nonprofits from wanting to serve in Portsmouth. I will also share, so my mother, who is a retired Portsmouth public school teacher, is the single reason that I am here and that I have not given up on this experience. As I mentioned a second ago, we have continuously had a goalpost that keeps being moved. I am more than happy to speak to that, but I just want to share my 2 asks here today. Number 1, my ask is that our appeal be overturned. That is number 1. And number 2, our ask is that in addition to our appeal being overturned, that the leaders in this room grant our organization, our nonprofit organization, the ability to and the authority to provide pro bono technical assistance to the different agencies that our nonprofit organization serves, like we've successfully done with 30 communities, where we've both identified and eliminated issues with taxpayer dollars. So who does that include? That includes the permit office, the planning office. But again, we are asking, as I mentioned, for number one, for our appeal to be overturned. And number two, we are asking for the authority to provide technical assistance with improving the experience. And how that would look, I'm happy to go in further detail. But I just want to say very quickly, as I mentioned, and this will be the third and last time that I say it, the goalpost has continuously moved as we have been working with the Planning Office and Downtown Design Committee. So to respect everyone's time here, I would ask that I defer the remaining of my time to reply to the latest unmet expectations that the Downtown Design Committee and the Planning Office will share with us this evening. So again, I'll defer to the leadership here, but my request would be that I provide yield the remainder of my time for efficiency to just reply to what they've identified this evening.
Sir, this is your time to speak. You don't have to defer anything. If my colleagues have any questions, once your speaking time is over, you have an opportunity to do that. If you have something else you need to add, we're more than happy to allow for you to do that. So I just wanted to make it clear, you don't have to defer your time for us to ask questions. There will be a Q&A period that will enable my colleagues to ask those questions of you.
Thank you, Mayor. And well understood. And my point of just saying that is to get clear on what they will share this evening, because as I've mentioned, over the past year, we've been working with these offices. They would set expectations and they would continuously move. So I would really surgically, if okay with the leadership here, like to leverage my time at the end to reply, pinpoint to what they share.
Sir, this is not a courtroom. We're not going to have rebuttals back and forth. That is not the purpose of this. You as the applicant have your opportunity to present your case, which you have done, and you are allotted time to do that. Once your time is up and questions are asked, you will have an opportunity to answer your questions, have your questions answered. Then the Planning Commission will come up, as we have asked them to come and present their position. This is not an opportunity where we go back and forth. That's the process, okay? I just wanted
Understood,
to
Mayor.
help you understand that. Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, what's your name again? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Timothy Underwood.
Mr. Underwood, yeah, this is an appeal you're bringing, and you've mentioned now on, I believe, 3 occasions that there was a moving of the goalposts. I think you should use your time to explain what you mean by this moving of the goalposts, because evidently you're saying that there was some criteria that was there and then it was changed, and that's, I thought, would be the basis of why you're coming before us. So I would advise you to use your time to explain what you mean by that.
Absolutely. And permission to address those with a handout up front? Okay. Yes.
He will then distribute them to my colleagues.
So as that's being passed out, I'll share that there are several tabs. Specifically, there are 8 tabs. We don't have time to go through each of them, but I want to get very clear on the timeline in tab C. So if you could please go to tab C. So tab C really starts where it initiates our communications with the planning office. And what's not mentioned here, and I think this is very important for the leaders in this room to understand, is that we met with the planning office. We had 65 interactions leading up to December 2nd. So between September 26th and December 2nd, we had nearly 65 interactions. The majority of those were email, several were calls. During those requests, expectations came out from the planning office. They wanted to see schematics. They wanted to see visuals. So we hired an architectural firm. We hired, in addition to that, an engineering firm. We went in, we provided them, and what we provided them, we were advised that we're going to have to make some really expensive changes because we're making more than 50% changes to the structure. We have to bring everything up to code. So based on the cost from our architect and based on the input from our engineers, we identified point blank that this is not feasible to proceed. It's too costly. So we provided that, and we have since been told that that was not enough. So I then went to the week of Christmas. We received a request, 2 additional requests, which we turned around as quickly and as much as we could, leading up to this January meeting. In early January, we met with the Downtown Design Committee. Frankly, they were all over the place, but the questions that they asked were valid, so we addressed them as best as we could, and we got back to them. And what they wanted, we feel that we have addressed. And then they've come back and they want more. And I say more as in we met what they said, what they had identified was acceptable. And that was achieved. And then we provided that, and they just kept asking and asking. So at this point, based as I shared on the just the constant goal moving and the user experience, we feel that this is a lost cause. We cannot proceed without the support of this council.
Are you finished, sir? Or are you open for questions now?
Yes, I'm open for questions.
Okay.
Yep.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a question, but I would like to hear the other side of the story.
That will be
city
forthcoming.
manager, is somebody from planning can speak to this?
Yes, that will be after
Okay.
after he's done presenting. Councilman Hugel, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, Mr. Under, I'm going to try to help you. The appeal that's in front of us is you've asked to demolish the building, and the Downtown Design Committee has denied you permission to demolish the building, right?
That is correct.
And that's it. You've asked to demolish the building, they've said no. Reading through the package, it appears that there was a lot of discussion about what you're going to build behind this building, which in my mind doesn't have anything to do with do you demolish the building or not. It appeared from the package that there really was only one thing that they asked for that I didn't see you provide, but you spoke to it just now, and that's the architectural review of the structure, which you told them the architectural review was the structure's in such bad condition that it's not feasible to refurbish the structure, hence your desire to tear it down and start with a new structure. All that's, we're tracking here?
That is correct.
Okay, so in my mind, we kind of got 2 choices tonight. We can either approve you to demolish a building that's falling down and that vagrant people have been habitating and that you've been steadily getting compliance tickets written on because the building has fallen down and you're trying not to spend money on a building that you simply want to tear down. And it's not a historical building, and it's not in the historical district of downtown. And so that's one option, tear the building down and solve all of those problems and clear the deck so that you can move on to your next step, which, by the way, you may still experience moving goalposts because the next step will be you got to submit the design in detail that satisfies the architectural requirements and all of that you haven't invested in yet because you haven't gotten permission to tear the building down. And I assume you're waiting to tear the building down before you spend any more money to finalize the rest of the site plan and details of the building, that would satisfy some of the other concerns that I saw the design committee was worried about in terms of, how the building is going to look in the midst of the neighborhood and all that. Is that all that's still true?
That is true.
Okay. So that's one choice. We let you tear the building down. The other choice is we say, no, we're going to stick with what the design committee decided, and we're not going to let you tear the building down. And I take it from the discussion that you had with the downtown design committee. If that were to happen, then you would walk away from this. We would still be stuck with a old house that's falling down, that has vagrants occasionally living in it. And we'd be out looking for somebody else that wants to buy that home from you, and cross our fingers that they decide it's worth their while to invest the money to bring an old falling down building up to current code. And that seems a little unlikely. But the other thing that I think we have the opportunity to do in approving the demolition is to send the message that we're reasonable people. And when reasonable people talk with reasonable people about doing things that help the city, that we're willing to listen and be reasonable. And so I think that's really what you're asking from us tonight is, can we be reasonable and let you demolish an old building that's fallen down so that you can invest in the next phase, which is building something that you're going to live in and that offers an opportunity for a couple of homeless vet families or homeless vets to live in with you. Tracking?
Tracking, and I would just add one thing,
Okay.
Admiral, and that is, we would also ask that we be given the authority to provide technical assistance as I requested.
Okay, so I got that.
Yeah.
That's not on the docket tonight.
Right.
We're willing to talk about process improvement kind of after the fact, but let's stick to the main thing, and the main thing that you're here for tonight is to get permission to demolish the building
Yes, sir.
that you currently own so that you can move on to your next step, yes?
That's 100% correct. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
perfect. That's it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other questions from my colleagues on council? Seeing none, then thank you, sir, for your presentation. And Madam Manager, is the next presenter coming forward, please? Okay. If you could state your name and address, sir?
My name is Nathan Lay, 310 Chandler Harbor Drive, Portsmouth, Virginia, 23701. I'm here as the representative from the Downtown Design Review Committee. I'd like to speak briefly as to our committee's understanding, and
Could you speak into the
And-
mic? Thank you.
I'd like to just speak briefly as to our committee's understanding as to the process and why the decisions were made. So, I'm not privy, and neither is anyone on the committee, to the 65 or so interactions that may or may not have taken place with the planning department prior to the first time we saw this application. When the application was presented, members of the committee felt that they didn't have enough information available to make a decision to whether or not to approve the demolition of the building. Unfortunately for the applicant, in the time that he met with us versus the time he met with us the second time, we had some months where we didn't have a quorum present, and we had some things we ran into that delayed his application, which is not an excuse and is very unfortunate, and I think reflects kind of poorly on our committee. That being said, when he came back, he had provided a lot more information than previous, and it was indicated that there was a report from a structural engineer that specified that the building was fit for demolition and really not able to be occupied. I believe some of the members of the committee wanted to see the report versus just the word of mouth. With that in mind, a motion was made and seconded by the committee to support the application for demolition. The two of us that voted in support were the only two that voted in support of that. And the remainder of the committee elected to vote against. I believe that their reasoning, and I don't want to speak entirely for others' thought process, but my understanding of the reasoning was they wanted to see that report, and it was indicated to us that there was no longer any time left for another month to see the report, and a decision needed to be made that day. So I think that's why the motion and the vote came. And I think that kind of sums it up. I'm happy to answer any questions or attempt to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from my colleagues on council? Councilman Hugel, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So Mr. Lay, you said you were one of the folks that voted to support. Have you visited this building?
I was someone who voted in support. I don't know that I stated that. There were two of us that
Yeah.
did. I'm sure that it's in the minutes. So
It is.
Thank you for reading the package. Know that that doesn't always happen in some of these instances.
Trust me, that happens.
Yeah.
We read what you send us.
Well, thanks.
Yep.
I have not visited the site. I can tell you that the two of us that voted in support are probably in allied professions that are similar to land planning and permitting and architecture and things like that.
Yeah.
Other members of the committee are not. I remember these are volunteers. This is the first time in my 4 or 5 years that I feel like we actually have a consistent committee of people that show up for the meetings. So others on the committee, I believe, have visited. I have not. I didn't necessarily need to visit to understand the conditions.
Okay, thank you. So I did visit the building and with the package to understand what Mr. Underwood's trying to do. Whether you had a copy of a report or word of mouth from the architectural firm, I think it's pretty clear walking the building that what he wants to do ain't gonna work with the building in the shape that it's in without a substantial investment compared to the cost to tear the building down and start fresh. And so I appreciate you being here and providing clarity on how the discussion went at the Downtown Design Committee. It did appear to me that there was a fair amount of conversation around what was gonna be built back. And as I said in my earlier comments to Mr. Underwood, that's part 2 of this discussion, another approval process that he'll have to undergo to get from kind of the 40% floor plan and sketch to finalized permit-ready plans that I guess will have to be reviewed again to make sure that they're consistent with the character of the neighborhood. So given all that, I think I didn't see a whole lot of consternation about tearing the building down. It seemed more like what's going to get built back in place of the building. As I said, something fresh has got to be better than what's there now.
I think you've summed that up pretty accurately. I think that despite the fact that we were tasked to vote on the demolish of the building, that you have people that do get hung up on the appearance of what is coming back. A lot of our members are residents of downtown, and so they have that, they're tied to that. You know, as I mentioned, I live in Green Lakes, I'm on the other side of the city.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think that maybe decisions may have been voted on that were being dictated by things outside of the purview, even though we understood that the applicant would come back with what he would like to do. I think that's where some of the issues may have arisen.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Are there any other comments from my colleagues on council? Thank you, Mr. Lane. Thank you for your service, too, as well. The city attorney has asked for the floor. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Before a motion is made, I would like to just update council that the question before you is whether the applicant is able to demolish the building. That is what the motion would be about. Okay? So make your motion.
Is there any, is there a motion on the floor?
So, Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Mr. Underwood's desire to demolish the building.
Second.
Is there any additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, would you please vote electronically?
This item is adopted 5-6-0 to overturn the commission's recommendation.
Thank you all. Thank you all for your participation. And Madam Interim City Manager, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Now we will start the order for collective bargaining. Our first speaker will be from the National Firefighters Union. Let me, the name, Mr. Kevin O'Connor. Yes, sir. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Is the mic on?
The mic is on, sir.
Very good, thank you. My name is Kevin O'Connor. I provided a PowerPoint slide deck, which I think traces his history going back as far as Jamestown. So I'm going to try to summarize it at a higher level. What I'd like to start with is a little bit of an introduction of myself, the organization that I'm representing today, and a high-level issue, a high-level discussion of the issue of collective bargaining generally, public sector, and here in Portsmouth, Virginia. My background is I was a firefighter in Baltimore County, Maryland for a number of years, both labor and management. I served as chief of staff to the fire chief and was also our local union president. As my career progressed, I started working for the International Association of Firefighters in Washington, D.C., where I led their governmental affairs division and public policy. In that capacity, I was working with other organizations, League of Cities, on grant funding. I know you all have in the past gone for AFG Safer grants. That was something I started lobbying back in the 90s. I also served collectively with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, chairing the Congressional Fire Service Institute. So I've been dealing with these type of issues for a very, very, very long period of time. The International Association of Firefighters is very unique in terms of overall labor unions. We're an organization that essentially has almost a monopoly control of career firefighters and EMS across the country. And we think that's a very good thing. When you think of other unions, they're very diverse. They're not everywhere. Our members are in every single community, both here in the Commonwealth and across the country. We have 343,000 members, but most importantly, they're broken down into about 3,700 affiliate chapters. Now, what does that mean? That means we're part of the community. We're part of the fabric of the community. Our people live there. They're vested in the success of that organization. Unionism for a lot of people, and I recognize that I'm in Chairman Scott's congressional district, means a lot of different things. For the IAFF, it's collaboration. Wages are important, certainly they are. We are a labor union. We believe our people should be treated fairly. But more importantly, we're a profession. When you're riding on highway, you see that little red sticker on the back of somebody's window that says IAFF. Our people are proud of our organization. Every single person that ascends into management in the fire service started as a firefighter. There's a fraternity, a brotherhood, not unlike the military. Everyone has the same focus and the same purpose. Collective bargaining is something that really legitimately allows us a seat at the table. So I'd like to state, collective bargaining generally, it means so many things to different people. You think in the private sector of strikes, what's going on now in Ford, you think of discord, but in the public sector and specifically in the fire service, that really isn't what it's about. It's about working together. When you go to an International Association of Fire Chiefs conference, either nationally or locally, you're going to see the leadership of the IAFF. And when you go to an IFF conference, you can pretty much count on one of the keynoters is going to be someone from management. Why is that? Our common interests revolve around the safety of the community, protecting life and property, and the safety of members. As I go through some examples a little bit later on, I will actually get into that a little bit further. But what I'd like to do is basically define collective bargaining. It's simple. It's just a process whereby management and labor sit down to discuss issues, terms of employment, and hopefully reach an agreement. The Virginia law doesn't mandate that an agreement ever has to be reached. It just mandates that a process occurs, a structured process. That is collective bargaining. What I'd like to do is dispel some things that collective bargaining is not. A lot of folks will say, well, collective bargaining, right to work can't coexist. That's just absolutely not accurate. You look at states like Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, Wyoming, Oklahoma, Texas. All right-to-work states all have various forms of collective bargaining. Wyoming and Oklahoma, two of the reddest states, actually have full interest arbitration statewide. In Texas, their law is very similar to what is being proposed, well, what passed in Virginia and what is operational now, and that is the state essentially passing a statute allowing local option. That's how Texas has operated now for the last dozen years. In Florida, it's incorporated actually into their state's constitution. So right to work, which Virginia has a long tradition of right to work, is not at all impacted by collective bargaining, both empirically and in terms of practice. It also doesn't allow unions to be recognized through something called card check for folks at federal and congressional legislation. There was something years ago called the Employee Free Choice Act that unions, people could just sign a card and instantly the union's recognized. Your state law makes it very clear that a process has to be established for an actual election. So there is a process to do that, and that's incorporated in the state law. Does not mandate any outcomes. You sit down at the table, it mandates, as I said, it mandates a process, not an outcome. There are those who are going to suggest that it artificially inflates wages, and I actually want to compliment the mayor and this council. Your proposal, I noted from the Davenport slide deck, slide 4, you're offering a 7% pay raise next year for your employees in 2024. I can assure you, I've had access to contracts all over the country. That's not replicated in a lot of places, even where there is collective bargaining. I think the average wage increase nationwide, combined public and private sector, is 4.8% in 2023. So the point is, there can be a bit of an increase, but it's not dramatic. A 7% pay increase is legitimately, with collective bargaining or not, that aspect of a contract is not going to increase mightily, whether you have a bargaining agreement or not. And I would thank you for doing that. The same applies with respect to bond ratings. I can tell you, I mentioned I'm from Baltimore County. We've had collective bargaining in that jurisdiction since 1976. We've always maintained a AAA bond rating. There are a lot of factors there. It certainly merits consideration. We can provide data where jurisdictions have an equivalent or higher bond rating to the city of Portsmouth, and actually be able to provide you where there's collective bargaining, what those bond ratings are. So, I don't know if that was me. If we decided to move forward, if the council and mayor decide to move forward, how would it work in Virginia and the Commonwealth, but more specifically, how would it work here in Portsmouth? And the answer is absolutely any way that you want it to work. And that's really the genius and the beauty of statute 40.1-57.2, the legislation by Senator Sasaloff and Delegate Guzman. First, it's 100% local option. All the state did was pass a law saying you can do it. So Richmond's not intervening. The decisions are going to be here made in this room. There's no statewide bureaucracy that is established. It's not some states like Florida where there's a public safety or a public employment board. You get to make the decisions here on how you want to address those issues. Fiscal control, one of the most important things about the Virginia statute, you have ultimate fiscal control. You can't have an outside entity come in and actually impact your budget. You are the fiscal watchdog. Yes, you have to sit down at the table. Yes, you will be able to come up with an agreement that you can sign, but you have the ability to say no. You have the ability through the strings of the purse to make sure that whatever is offered is reasonable and in line with the priorities of this council and this city. You also get to determine what actually is a bargaining unit. It's part of the statute that's been proposed in most cities where firefighters are represented. It's from battalion chief down to firefighters. But you get to make that decision. You also establish the scope of bargaining. What are you going to bargain about? Can you bargain about safety? Can you bargain about staffing? In some states where they have bargaining, they're statewide pension systems. So that issue is just written off the table because it's not relevant. Again, this is the one statute I've seen nationwide that gives the absolute control to local government. The timetables of bargaining, the processes for settling disputes, it all rests on your shoulders. The enforcement mechanism, there's no outsider coming in and telling you that you need to do this. If you're a fan of Jeffersonian democracy, there's nothing in terms of more local control than the way this law has been structured. And I very much encourage you to look at it in that context. What works here in Portsmouth might not work in Roanoke, and vice versa. So what are the real advantages? We've talked a little bit about your very generous 7% pay raise. For firefighters, the issue to us is health and safety. We are involved collaboratively with management, not just fire service management, League of Cities. We've sponsored things there for education, public fire safety education. We actually run programs for our members, career and management, on cancer testing. We have 10,000 people in terms of if the people are in a crisis. We have peer review teams established. We train in hazmat. We've mentioned the grant programs. We do hazmat, WMD training. We're moving into wildland training. All of these things we do collaboratively. We are very proud of our jobs as firefighters, and that's pretty much a universal element. People don't want to protect bad employees. We want to elevate good employees. And that's something that can be accomplished pretty easily through the collective bargaining process. In the proposal that the council is considering, lines 18 and 19 say, and this kind of struck me, it is a policy of the city to promote harmonious, safe, and cooperative relationships with the employees. That's something legitimately that I think the legislation, if enacted, would accomplish. Talk a little bit about the precise model of the IAFF. We have a labor management initiative that's been talked about widely. It was focused in the National Association of Counties at one point. A lot of our local union leadership ascend into managerial roles as chief of the fire department. Des Moines, Omaha, Baltimore County, Miami. I could just keep naming them. And the reason for that is where there's a process and it's done in terms of teamwork, everybody's working together, everyone rises to the top. There really aren't teams, there's not cliques. When it's done appropriately, it's better for everybody else. Again, for us, it's really based on collaboration. Some of the advantages with the IAFF is because we are national in scope, we work with organizations in providing GISs. We just want to try to be doing the right thing for our membership and for the jurisdictions that we serve. The whole really is the equal to sum of its parts. Management has a place, labor has a place, elected officials have a place. Collective bargaining is a nexus that really kind of brings it all together. So I'll conclude with a question, and I'm happy to answer any questions or refer to any pieces of the slide deck if you have specific questions. But let me just end with this. And the question is, why should you be granting firefighters collective bargaining here in Portsmouth? Since the New Deal enacted the National Labor Relations Act in 1938, every single construction tradesperson who builds a fire station has the right to organize and bargain for wages. Every single machinist that puts their breathing apparatus together has had the right to organize and bargain for wages. Every textile worker that sews our garments together is able to organize and bargain for wages. And the factory workers that put our fire trucks together, they too can organize and bargain for wages. The people who can't are the ones living in that firehouse, wearing that protective equipment, wearing that breathing apparatus, and riding the fire trucks and lifting their lives. This is just asking for a seat at the table. It's not asking for anything draconian. It's not looking to change the scope of a labor management. It's to create a seat at the table. Where it's been done successfully. folks from managerial organizations like the chiefs would certainly attest to this. It's just giving people an opportunity. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Well, I will go ahead. Councilman Hugo, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I didn't catch your name, sir.
Kevin O'Connor.
O'Connor, okay. Mr. O'Connor, thanks for being here tonight and sharing your perspective. One of the discussions that we have had around collective bargaining is, and now let's talk specifically about the firefighters. So you mentioned the pending pay raise. We've done pay compression, pay raise. We've bought new apparatus. We have corrected an issue with heart and lung insurance. So there's a long list of things that have happened over the last year or so where we have heard the firefighters here and responded with action to try to address things that needed to be addressed. And the question then is, well, okay, so if we've addressed those things, what else does the firefighter union think they need to benefit from collective bargaining? Why collective bargaining instead of just continuing the behavior that we've had over the past year? Can you give me your opinion on that, please?
I absolutely can.
I bet you can.
The answer to that is continuity. When you have a progressive administration, city or fire department, cooperation can certainly be engendered without collective bargaining. There's no question at all about that. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't protect things. And I'll give you a success story of a native Virginian. The gentleman's name is Adam Teal. Adam currently is the Philadelphia Fire Commissioner. Before that, he was the chief in Alexandria, and he was Terry McAuliffe's kind of emergency services coordinator on a statewide basis. He went up to Philadelphia. They had problems up there with prior fire chiefs. He went right in, sat down with the organization, said, we have a process here that you have with collective bargaining. I want to sit down and I want to go over all these different things. I can't promise you we're going to get it done, but it built the engagement among the membership. And they were able to make the changes. I won't sit here and bore you with all of them. But essentially, if you all are able to put something in practice in the fire department, you don't know who the fire chief's going to be in 3 years. You don't know who's going to be sitting around this table. All you have to do, and I make a living lobbying Congress, is look at what's going on up in Washington, D.C. You want to make sure that the process exists past the people. And that's the purpose of the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I have kind of the reciprocal question to ask, which is, there's an investment that the city will have to make this happen. So while we've done a lot of things and we're investing in the firefighters and in the police department, in the city staff with pay issues and whatnot, there's still an investment that's going to be required, and there's going to be push-ups required, frankly, on the management side to get in a position to do collective bargaining. There's staff that we're going to have to hire to handle labor relations that isn't in the city lineup card right now. So what does the city get in return for that investment from your perspective?
Well, I will respond solely as it relates to the fire service.
Okay.
I could make a case, with respect to larger employee groups, but our business is fire. From the perspective that I think you get from an investment return is you get immediate engagement of not just the people sitting behind me, but their successors. You also have access to an entire network within the fabric of the International Association of Firefighters. We work as much with fire chiefs on things in terms of going after grants, in terms of getting training, in terms of providing training. Just 2 weeks ago, one of the things I do as a service to my community, Baltimore, is I serve as a fire commissioner, non-compensated. We lost 2 firefighters. The IAFF went in, soup to nuts, handled all the line of duty deaths, all the hotel arrangements, I mean, it's a value added. I mean, we operate as a family. And that's why I began my comments kind of trying to differentiate a little bit between the IAFF and private sector unions, and even some other public sector unions that are a bit more edgy. I mean, there's a lot of value that we bring in terms of information. When you legitimately have, I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that we're 91% organized of all professional firefighters in the country. You're able to garner a lot of information, a lot of positives that you can share with jurisdictions who are participatory in it.
Okay, thank you. And one last comment. I'll make the comment, and then if you have a response, you're welcome to. So my experience is right down the street here in the Naval Shipyard, where I was in a collective bargaining arrangement and had union workers working with me. Safety was an issue there, much as it is with the firefighters. We decided that we wanted to apply for an OSHA STAR site through the Voluntary Protection Program. And it was interesting to me that OSHA required the labor leadership in the shipyard to sign up side by side with the management leadership in the shipyard to commit to making the environment a safer environment. And so I know from that experience, the collaboration between labor and management is at least viewed by OSHA as critical to provide a safe working environment, and I wondered if you'd like to add a comment.
Sure. We have a labor management initiative. We're working jointly with the chiefs now, both in detecting cancers for firefighters, mental health issues, studying the impact, which was a military issue as well, PFAS and turnout clothing, and all of it is trying to aggregate the knowledge, resources, and everything to try to move in the right direction. I would also add too, Admiral, is, as I'm sure you're aware, the Navy firefighters are also represented, and at most of the bases, the cooperation is extraordinary. You know, I have friends at Annapolis, both fireside and from the academy side. It works well. I mean, it just works well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, Mr. O'Connor, thank you
Yes, sir.
for the information. I was part of council when this issue came before us previously, and I'm still not convinced of the value of what your organization represents as far as unionizing the firefighters. One of the things, and I'm asking the questions too because I know that our citizens are listening and this has been a very watched issue. So one of the things that you presented, particularly at the end of your presentation, was you listed several organizations that have unionized, the garment workers, the equipment workers, and I noticed that each of those were private organizations. Okay?
That's right.
And so, therefore, the issue in unionizing with private organizations is different than a public organization. And the issue particularly is that, as you know, management and labor at the private sector particularly have competing interests. The incentives for management to keep wages low so profits are high, that's a major benefit and incentive that causes some tension between management and labor, trying to cut costs for safety issues, to also hit the bottom line. That's not the issue that I see here, particularly, and I can't speak for all cities, but I have not seen a devaluation of what firefighters bring to the community. To the extent that you verified something that I needed to hear that confirms in your conversation about the 7% raise, which was done without collective bargaining. So therefore, why should we spend millions of dollars to put in place a system that the firefighters here are already getting the benefit of without collective bargaining? The other issue that I have is who becomes the voice once unionization occurs? And can you, who becomes the
Let me
voice?
first start with the end of it, and then I'll get back and try to wrap the answer around it. The leadership locally are the ones who interact with the council and the mayor. You don't have people coming in from out of town, bargaining. They have resources naturally, but we believe very strongly, it's why we have the 3,700 affiliate chapters that I mentioned, that nobody knows their city, nobody knows the elected officials, and nobody knows the citizens better than the people on the ground.
Right, and
It
that's-
makes it a very different model.
Right. That's the
Right.
issue I want you to address
Yeah,
at the local level.
very
Who
different,
becomes the
right.
voice? And how is that voice determined?
Well, two-part answer to that. The voice is the local voice, and that is universal in our organization. We
Right.
have a concept called local autonomy.
Right.
I can't come from Washington DC, where I work now, to my old local and tell them
Right.
what to bargain, what's important, who they should support, ever.
Right.
It's all done locally. The membership elects their leadership, and their leadership represents them for whatever period they determine is appropriate.
Right, so who is that membership?
It would be the membership of the union and the membership of a bargaining union aren't always the same thing. You can have people who this council may not choose to give representational rights to deputy chiefs, as an example, but they can still freely join the union on their own volition. So the union membership, the people who belong to the union, are the ones who can vote. That can differ a little bit between a bargaining unit.
Okay, so what about those who are not?
Retirees, for example, can
What
differ.
about those who are not a part of that union, and how is their voice represented?
Their voice is represented. They have every right to talk to the fire chief. As you
Right.
probably know, the Janus decision that came down a couple years ago, there is no such thing as a closed shop in the public sector anymore. Virginia, there never has been.
Right.
We've had the state of Virginia, ironically, we're in a district that includes Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia.
Yeah.
The largest number of unionized firefighters we have is in Virginia.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you correctly, then you have one voice that's being represented by the union, which circumvents the fire chief and deals with council.
No, not circumvents. I would suggest it augments them, but you also have.
You say you would suggest what?
That it augments the voice of the fire chief. It offers a different perspective.
Yeah, well, there are some that differ with what you just stated, but as far as the voice of the majority that would be the voice, what about the voice of the minority?
In cities like Atlanta, for example, Baltimore, there are affinity organizations for African-American firefighters, female firefighters, all of which can raise their issues with the politicians and with the fire chief.
Right.
There's an organization called Women in Fire Service, which again, one of the differentiations between the IFF and other unions, we embrace those organizations.
Right.
We
Right,
partner with them.
but when it comes to whose voice is being recognized, that becomes the unionized voice that
As
is
it relates to
recognized.
bargaining, that is correct.
Right, and so you can embrace all you want those organizations. The bottom line is what the law is going to dictate as far as who gets represented. And so when I see this type of arrangement, to me, I see a suppression of the minority vote, which has been historical. And so I don't see anything that has been presented that would change that otherwise. And so I'm just saying that for a city like Portsmouth to invest the amount in the millions of dollars that it would take to do this at the expense of minority groups losing their voice, also at the expense of us doing what we're already doing, and that is providing the salaries that are requested to the extent that there have been lawsuits that because of the city following directive of the fire department with the exempt issue, that the city had to come back and end up paying millions of dollars for back pay. And so I still have not heard anything that would suggest this would be a wise investment on the part of the city to put millions of dollars into doing something that we're already seeing achieved.
The only thing I'll respond to with the disenfranchisement is we've got places all over the country, African-American cities, predominantly Hispanic cities, and the issue of the firefighters union being part of a disenfranchisement, it's just not something that's occurred, at least in the 38 years that I've been around. Now, I'm certain it did prior to that, but that's not on my watch that I can speak to. And certainly your opinion is a valid opinion. It's one I don't happen to agree with, but it is a valid opinion. The Commonwealth of Virginia has prohibited bargaining for a long time. But I will say, on average, I mentioned a number of red states, southern states, conservative states, and certainly northern states where bargaining is an operationally effective way of managing relationships between firefighters and their public sector employees. Your point also is correct with respect to the private sector. Very, very different deal. And, their ability to strike, for example, is something that we would never, ever ask for because we don't think it's appropriate in a setting of protecting property and lives.
Vice Mayor Lucasberg, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. O'Connor. I guess my question is being transparent and open, the amount of money that the city would have to invest to get this going. I like hearing different perspectives. We've had several presentations, and I was a part of the council that voted prematurely in 2020 before Governor Northam delayed the actual vote. And we didn't have nearly as much information as we do now, so we do need to be informed going into this final vote and this decision. My concern or my question is, the city will be able to, and we've met with our team here, our council and our legal team as well, who will be helping to guide the process depending on which way this vote goes today. We will be able to write what we want in our policy, in our resolution, and that the city council will be able to vote up or down on issues that you would bargain for, say, if we didn't have it in the budget to move forward. And I believe that a lot of people look at the revenue that we've prematurely or have, to date earned from our casino earnings, and we want to know what that looks like long-term. We've only been in that type of revenue for about 10 months now, so we need to see realistically what our funding looks like at that point too. And then another concern was we know that we have a union already in place and that there are other organized groups that are together. We know that, the fire would be the first one out of the gate, and how would this benefit? We know that our fire police would have to create a separate union, and then our general employees. So how does this provide an opportunity for us to move in that direction in a positive manner?
Well, I think, at least from the fire side, and this also gets to Dr. Whitaker's comment, I should have said this earlier, I believe that, and I'm not a member of the Portsmouth Fire Department, but 90% of the members of the overall fire department, of the total fire department, do in fact right now belong to the Portsmouth Firefighters Union. The generalized questions that you were asking about law enforcement's represented, I believe, here in this city by the Fraternal Order of Police, but there are other organizations that represent officers. There's PBAs. I think Chesapeake or Norfolk is represented by PBA. There's National Association of Police Officers. And for general employees, it's all over the map with respect to public sector employers like AFSCME, SEIU. This is not a unique problem here. Because of the nature of our organization, the unionization of our members is greater. But in my city of Baltimore, for example, they had the same issues when they were organizing, and AFSCME actually were the ones that ended up picking up the general employees. And the Fraternal Order of Police, ironically, is who represents the law enforcement officers there. But the key is what you said, and it's what I really try to hit in my testimony. The enabling statute that was passed in Richmond gives you guys control. And I couldn't come here and say that If I were making this case in Oklahoma, I would have to be saying, you have an entire state bureaucracy. I believe in collective bargaining. I think it's worth your effort to do it. But here, the folks sitting at this table get to craft what works for you. And that makes it very unique and very self-fulfilling that you get to do what works for your city.
Thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. O'Connor, you mentioned something to our Vice Mayor that 90% of the firefighters in Portsmouth are part of the union. Okay, now that's what I'm speaking to when I say the voice being suppressed. Are you aware of what percentage of that 90% is made up of minority firefighters?
I am not.
Well, I don't even know if 10% of the fire department in Portsmouth is minority. And so you would have a significant suppression of their voice. And that's a concern that I don't think investing millions of dollars like that at the expense of suppressing the voice. So I'm not sure if that's something that, or climate we want to create.
All I can say anecdotally, that in cities like Baltimore, Prince George's County, Maryland, D.C., the unions are actively and vibrantly involved in minority recruitment in terms of women. So we like to think that where we're there, we can be part of the solution.
Right. Well, recruitment and presence are those two different things, and I'm speaking about those that are there now that would be under the voice of the union at the expense of their voice.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. O'Connor, for being here. Couple of things. One, you mentioned earlier that you would not support a strike or call for a strike, but isn't it a fact that the Commonwealth of Virginia statute prohibits public employees from striking?
I'm sure it does, yeah.
And I wanted to make that clear because I think the public misunderstands that would not be allowed.
Yeah.
The other thing where the rubber really meets the road is not in that ordinance that we'll pass tonight, but rather in the collective bargaining for a contract. Can you explain what role you or the International will play in those negotiations? Are they strictly local?
They're local in terms of who is at the bargaining table. We have resources like we can do a municipal financial analysis of things. We can do GIS, and that's just not unique to the local. I mean, we've done that for fire departments as well. But no outsider will be sent in here to sit down at the table and bargain on their behalf. It will 100% be done at the local level. That's how our organization has worked since 1918. And it's one of the reasons, frankly, why I think we're successful. You don't have somebody that, gets a degree in, labor relations from Cornell and, is just dropped in San Diego and, hey, you're running the city of San Diego. We don't work that way. It's local.
Okay. The other thing, let's talk about the negotiations. Let's say that they can't agree. Step us through what happens at that point.
Well, again, you get to draft your dispute mechanism deal. The council gets to draft that. There's nothing that the state did. So there's all kind of ways that it can be done. Let me say one caveat at the first part of it. The only thing that can't be done is your fiscal authority can't be stripped. They can't take your ability to manage the finances away. So you could structure something in terms of a binding arbitration for non-fiscal issues. That could be done. You could have a voluntary impasse. You could direct the American Arbitration Association to do it. You could set the process how you want to set the process. And that's what's unique about this. My advice would be, it's a good thing to do, and just get it right. I mean, sit down and come up with something that works for a city.
Thank you.
Councilman Tillage, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. O'Connor, thank you for coming and presenting. I would say, in my opinion, I think this is probably the most comprehensive presentation we've had on collective bargaining. I had quite a few questions that I think all of my colleagues already answered, and I thank you for giving a very good answer to those. So my concerns have actually been addressed, but I just wanted to thank you for taking your time to come speak to us.
And I don't know the timetable on any of this, but if you need anything follow-up or further, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, provide any additional information.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. I have a few questions,
Yes, sir.
several questions. So I come from a blue-collar town that has a fire union, Erie, Pennsylvania, born and raised, and a good friend of our family was the fire chief. But I have a couple of questions for you that concern me. You stated that the national union wouldn't be involved in local negotiations. Now, I'm not going to suggest that that's not true, but is it realistic to think that your national organization and this local organization that pays dues to you, you would not have some input or involvement? Or perhaps, is it unreasonable to think that someone couldn't come down and have lunch with somebody to give them some guidance? Is that unreasonable?
Oh, no, what I was referring to exclusively is we will provide them with all the research information that they could possibly have, all the advice that they would ask, 100%. You're
Okay.
spot on. But what I'm suggesting is like the model for hypothetically AFSCME. They have professional people who work out of a regional or state headquarters that actually go into jurisdictions and sit down and bargain on behalf of their local members. What I'm saying is that's not our model. Certainly, we would provide, if they were negotiating here, we provide them salary comparisons that we would be able to generate from Norfolk or Chesapeake, 100%.
Okay.
I don't want to suggest for a minute
Okay.
that we wouldn't be doing
Okay.
that.
The other question I have, in your opinion, and you're certainly a professional with a lot of experience, is there ever a situation where collective bargaining isn't needed?
I would suggest that if everything is for the present moment, just like the 7% you're providing, I can't speak to all the other issues, but that actually is a pretty generous deal. But I've seen places where legitimately, Charleston, South Carolina is an example. We lost 9 firefighters down there at a superstore fire. There was absolutely no dialogue with the employees. There's national studies done, not by the union, but by OSHA, by other folks, that clearly demonstrate that they weren't operating correctly. I can point to other jurisdictions where you've had a change in administration and they said, you know what? We've decided, almost like a garbage contract, that we're going to give the EMS to a third-party provider. So, yeah, the consistency, when I was responding to the Admiral's question earlier, that's the issue. You get good people in place and you get good policy in place, bargaining protects that.
Right. And also, when you talk about collaboration, is it fair to say that collaboration has to occur in any situation, whether it's collective bargaining or not? Is that fair?
That's fair.
The other thing is, have you ever heard of things called sick outs? Is that a realistic thing in unions that unions participate in? I've done some reading and I don't know. I'm asking you because you're certainly more well-versed in that than I am.
I can tell you back in like the 60s and 70s, yeah, absolutely. I haven't heard of a sick out. We certainly haven't ever sanctioned a sick out.
But can they still occur in this environment?
Sure they can, but they can occur whether there's a union contract or not. Part of the purpose of having a contract is to make sure that there's a process, that if you're at the bargaining table, the union certainly, there's a process there. Where a lot of that things happened in the 70s were people trying to organize. But there hasn't been that kind of discord in a very, very long period of time.
Okay, that's good. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, so fiscal impacts, because that's what I really pay attention to. Portsmouth is a city that 50% of our land, we don't derive any taxes from. A hurricane, something catastrophic, anything could really put us in a big financial bind, where we don't have the flexibility financially, perhaps of cities like Baltimore City and other cities. Are you aware of any cities like, similarly situated like Portsmouth, with your data that has fiscal constraints that might cause a problem in a negotiation when you have a contract in place and there is a bargaining unit that says we want X, and you're saying and I understand that the city ultimately is control of the fiscal purse. I understand that. But is there ever a situation that you've dealt with? Portsmouth is unique in that regard. And I think that we do a very good job. We can all improve, we can get better, but I think we do a good job in our leadership and our council in listening to the concerns of our firefighters. I'll give you an example. When I was first on council, there was an issue brought up about the retirement, and our retirement rate, the rate of retirement that we were paying, the multiplier wasn't consistent with the region. And we listened very intently, and the council voted to raise that multiplier to give our firefighters parity with the region. So that's just one example. And so I just wanted to see if there ever been a consideration, because at the end of the day, it has to make fiscal sense too.
There have, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples, if that's okay with you. The first two I'll talk about is a little bit north of here. One is Atlantic City, New Jersey, that at one point operated, I'm going to say, don't hold me to it, 9 casinos. It went down to 3. Their revenue completely fell out, and concession bargaining that you wouldn't believe. 35% pay cuts that were done through negotiations. City of Miami, Florida, same type deal. Something occurred down there. I'm not quite sure what, but it really hit them fiscally hard, and there was bargaining. Flint, Michigan would be another example, and Detroit. There's cases that abound where we've had mature bargaining relationships, and something's happened to the city's finances that it's been dealt that way. Erie, Pennsylvania, I believe at one point was under Act 47, if you remember that.
They were. My friend was the mayor at that time.
Right. So, I mean, there's been cases like that where that's been worked through. And an example of a similar type town, and to your point, Vice Mayor, with the casinos, was down the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Gulfport, Biloxi, those cities. They ended up having bargaining agreements back in, I guess, the 90s, and a lot of it was contingent on the resources that they were developing from that. So there are parallels. I mean, with 3,700 affiliates, we've kind of gone through things a lot of different places.
That's all I have, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for
You're
the
welcome.
opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Madam Interim City Manager, you have the floor, ma'am.
Yes, our next presentation will be our annual retirement board presentation for our legacy systems, the fire and police, and the Portsmouth supplemental. The presenters will give their names and what division they represent.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
Hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. Could you
Excellent.
please state your name for us again?
Yeah, my name is Tom Shanley. I'm with John Hancock. We are the retirement plan provider for what we refer to as the frozen retirement system, and we'll explain that as we go through the presentation. So I have 2 individuals also joining me. They'll come up as part of this 3-part update. John Morrison, who is the assigned actuary, also with John Hancock, and then Brian Birnbaum, who's with Greystone, which is a company of Morgan Stanley. He'll come up and focus more on the investment aspect of the retirement system.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, just
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
I was going to ask the city manager, is this report in line still with collective bargaining and impact it's going to have on the retirement system? Is that what this is?
She stepped out to go to the rest.
Yeah.
If you want to hold a minute, we can pause just for a moment if that's okay, because
The
I don't know
city
the
attorney
answer.
might connect. Is that what this presentation is?
I don't want to speak for the manager, but in discussing it with her, I think it relates to the entities that are still in the retirement system as it's making its way, matriculating through, will connect to the dollars and cents related to what retirement costs has been and could be considering collective bargaining. So it is
Okay.
an item to consider as part of collective bargaining.
Okay, no, I just for my
Absolutely.
context, we're still in collective
still
bargaining.
in
All right, okay.
Yes,
All
sir.
right.
Yes. Please continue, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So again, my name is Tom Shinley. As I said, I'm with John Hancock. We have been the provider of this retirement system, which is a closed defined benefit plan for approximately the last 15 years. I've been thankful enough to work with the city over that time as well. So we're going to give this three-part update. I will give an executive overview, some highlights of the program, looking at the past fiscal year and also some updated information. And then I'll ask John to come up to take over the second part, and then Brian will come up and do the third part, obviously open for questions. So with regards to the executive summary, just want to point out a few things in addition to what I already stated. So currently the system has approximately $188 million that's invested in a separate trust that's held outside of city assets. It's still obviously an asset of the retirement program. Those assets are held combined with John Hancock and Morgan Stanley, again, who has an affiliation with Greystone. Those assets are set aside to pay for all current and ongoing future benefits for individuals that have a retirement benefit that's part of the system. As you can see from the third bullet, during the last fiscal year, we generated close to 11,500 monthly benefit checks that went out to these individuals for more than $28 million. And that's an important number and one we'll come back to as we talk through this, but it gives you a sense of the cash outflow that comes from the system and the assets that are held to support it. The good news is that the overall funded status, where we look at the comparison of liabilities or what is due now and what will be due compared to assets held, did improve from the prior fiscal year. And based on a number of projections that we have done throughout the years for the city, we really have been falling in line with what those projections predicted, if you will, how the portfolio would perform. And the other piece of good news is over the past year, the expenses to support the retirement system decreased. So just as a reminder, so I referred to this as a frozen or a closed system. This system stopped having new members be added to it going back 30 to 40 years. So if you see fire and police was closed in 1995, the supplemental system that covers city employees, designated city employees, that was closed back in 1984. And since that period of time, as new employees have come on board, those individuals go into versions of the VRS, the Virginia Retirement System. And in general, this retirement system is here to provide benefit payments for individuals based on service when they retire, if unfortunately a death occurs, to themselves in the future, and named beneficiaries based on how they set up their benefit payment. This graph here just gives you a high-level look at the past 11 years of what we've seen from the retirement system. So if you see the bars in green are the assets held, so market value of assets held for each fiscal year, compared to the bar in blue, which designates projected liabilities. And then the funded status, which essentially it's an actuarial determined number, which I'll let John talk to a little bit more, but it looks at the percentage of, looking at future benefits based on assets currently held and projections of both of those, to what percentage is the system holding assets to pay for those benefit payments. So as you can see in the red line, it's been very consistent in the area of around 70%. You'll see there was a big jump back in 2021. That was to the benefit of some good investment management by the retirement board and really strong markets at that point. But it has settled back into, again, where we have seen consistently around 70%. If we take a closer look ending in September, we'll see there's always going to be variability within the assets that are held. We see a slight dip where the overall funded level is around 67% now. Again, I mentioned 187 million. There's some comments here with regards to benchmarking. So we did take a look and we talked to this last year. to look at the average funding level of U.S. public retirement systems. You'll see it's reported here from a Boston College research study at 78%. So this number here, 67%, is a little bit below that. The Boston College research looks at different variations of how percentages of systems can be determined. So if we looked a little deeper into that study, and again, I'll let John comment a little bit more, we see that City of Portsmouth is closer to around 74, 75%, based on how the Boston College looked at that benchmark of groups. Last year, the retirement system here in Portsmouth was above that number, and again, we consistently see it right around that level, which is a good thing. One of the other comments up here just gives you an idea, and obviously an important aspect of the city of what will be required for contributions. So what's recommended based on the actuarial work done, the ADC, or the actuarial determined contribution for the upcoming fiscal year, is targeted to be around 8.4 million. That it is slightly up from the last fiscal year, was just under 8 million. So those are just some high-level updates on the system. Just want to give you a little bit more background on the ongoing government and oversight, and then I'll bring John up to take things from here for a little bit more information on the actuarial results. So there is a retirement board that oversees the system. The retirement board meets on a quarterly basis. That board meets directly with members from John Hancock, including myself or John or others if needed, and then also from Greystone Morgan Stanley, Brian, who will talk and give an update, Jim Whitney, who's also here among, as well as others as part of their team. So we meet on an ongoing basis. We give updates on the system. We talk to all the things, or I talk to the things that John Hancock does. And really, we're providing all of the ongoing administration, the record keeping, the issuing of checks, the actuarial work. We deal directly with individuals who are looking to model benefits, although the vast majority of individuals in the system are in pay, but we handle all that ongoing customer interaction. So we provide updates there, and then Brian, Jim, and their team, they focus on economic events, the impact of those. They talk with the board around proper asset allocation and forward-looking, decisions on how the money should be invested. And again, I'm sure Brian's going to comment a little bit further on that. This is just a slide to give you an idea of what the committee looks like. The committee is made up and has historically been made up of both public citizens, individuals that have ties to both fire and police, as well as working for the city. And then obviously individuals from city leadership and staff sit in on those meetings as well and are involved with discussion. I think I've given a little bit overview of what John Hancock does and what Greystone Morgan Stanley does. And again, and if questions come up, we can speak a little bit further to that. And then the last thing I just want to comment on is we operate in full disclosure and full transparency on fees and expenses. This is an annual look at what the expenses of running the system from the consultants that you work with here at John Hancock and Greystone. And what we also reference there is that there was a drop in expenses and fees paid over the last year. The expense structure for how we get paid is set up based on really the size of the program. So as the number of individuals and the benefits or the assets associated to them decrease as this system continues to get smaller, our fees also reflect that. Obviously, there are times where we see strong market performance and an increase of assets, which will help from an overall perspective of making sure that the fund has the assets there to pay for ongoing liabilities, and fees could variably increase as well. But they're in line, in agreements, and negotiated, and have continued discussions with the city and the board on what our fee structure is. So that's everything for me, just to set the stage. Again, I'm going to hand things over to John, and he'll take it from here and just give you a little bit more detail on the most recent actuarial valuation.
Welcome, John.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you for having me today. As Mr. Shanley mentioned, my name is John Morrison. I am the assigned actuary for the plan. I have a few slides in our presentation to give a high-level overview of the status of the plan. As Mr. Shanley mentioned, the systems have been closed to new entrants for quite some time now. So if you look at the demographic makeup of the participants in the plan, you'll see the plans are primarily inactive. So the liabilities for the plan really represent benefits for participants that are now retired and are currently receiving money in the plan. There still are a few remaining actives as of our recent valuation, but again, primarily participants receiving benefits from the system. When we look at an overview, the plan over the past fiscal year, as Mr. Shanley mentioned, we see an improvement in the funded status. What we see in this slide is we have that value of assets in the plan. So there's that separate account that's held in the trust to pay benefits for those participants. The liabilities represent the value of the stream of payments that we project to be paid out to those participants, brought back to today's dollars at the assumed 7.25% investment return. That represents the single liability, a single figure for those benefits to be paid out. When you compare the assets to the liabilities, we have a deficit in the plan of approximately $93 million as the prior fiscal year. You can also use that as a funded status. That's the percentage of the assets over the liabilities. When we look at where we were from June 30, 2022 to June 30, 2023, the two components we see on the liability side, the interest cost and benefit accruals. As we mentioned, the benefit accruals those are the additional accruals for those active participants in the plan. That's, at this point, basically a rounding error for the plan, given the few number of people that are still accruing benefits. So the majority of what you see there is the interest cost. So that represents the assumed growth in the liabilities as those future payments come 1 year closer to being due. Those are offset by the payments to the retirees. As Mr. Shanley mentioned, those are about just south of $30 million, so a pretty significant amount of money that is coming out of the plan on an annual basis. Those come out of the assets and the liabilities equally, so you can see there's no net impact on the funded status of the system. Moving over to the asset side, the assets will grow with contributions to the plan that are made by the city. The $7.9 million represents the actuarial determined contribution for fiscal 2023. That is projected to go up to $8.4 million for fiscal 2024. Over the past fiscal year, we had a strong investment return, so about a 10% return. So that's the $18.5 million, and then those expenses that Mr. Shanley mentioned come out of the plan. One thing to point out here is, well, a couple things to point out here. As Mr. Shanley mentioned, the funded status improved. So at the beginning of the year, there was a deficit of about $93 million. We see an improvement of funded status of about a deficit of $87 million. You will note that the assets of the plan are still decreasing, and this is a function of the value of the benefit payments that are coming out of the plan. It's about 14% of the plan assets that are coming out, so a significant amount of money is coming out of the plan. So even though we had a strong investment year, the city is continuing to make contributions, the asset pool is dropping. The hope here, and with the long-term funding strategy, is what you'll see is that the liabilities are dropping similarly. And so the hope is that as the contributions are made, the fund is earning money, that the assets will decrease less than the liability is decreasing, and that's how you close the gap in that funded status over the life of the plan. Any questions or comments?
Councilman Moody, sir, you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah, Mayor, it was asked earlier, and I think the city attorney replied that this was part of the collective bargaining presentation, but isn't it true that no members that will be involved in any collective bargaining agreement are in this plan, or would be in this plan?
There are no new members coming into the plan, so the plan has
Exactly.
been closed to new members for
Yes,
30 to 40 years.
it's a closed plan.
Correct.
Just wanted to make that point, you know, to label it as part of the collective bargaining presentation, and I guess the rebuttal, I just don't see it.
Yeah, the discussion, well, annually, they come and give this presentation every November. The reason it's a part of this discussion is because to understand the fiscal impacts is to understand what we already pay into a retirement plan for our fire police retirees. Even though it's a closed plan, all of these dollars still equate to what taxpayers pay out to be able to put money into this closed system. It's just another mechanism to understand the expenses that we pay for a retirement plan system, which is our legacy.
A system that those under any collective bargaining agreement won't be part of.
Yeah, that wasn't the point.
They're
Yeah.
under VRS.
Correct.
Is that,
That's my understanding, yes. Or
Okay.
current employees are in the VRS, correct?
thank you.
Hold on, Councilman Tillage, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. My question was very similar to Councilman Moody's. According to this slide, there's only 8 employees in the entire city that are active employees. And so, from my understanding, retirees that are already retired cannot be a part of collective bargaining. So, I understand that you did this presentation to talk about benefits that are already being offered, but I don't really see the correlation between this being part of the overall collective bargaining conversation. So I just want to get some clarity on how that connects.
The fiscal impact of what we are already paying out is not that it's open to any employees. It's a closed frozen system. However, there is a fiscal impact. And again, they do this presentation every year. And so what we're looking at is just the fiscal impacts, and that is the next presentation will come from our financial advisors. But all this correlates with debt. These are all expenses associated with what we put out every year annually for the cost of doing operations and doing business.
So, since we're having it this night, it's just coincidental that this happened to be the timing.
Yeah, because next one, we got some other things we have to deal with. Yeah, but it's still a fiscal impact. So, go ahead.
Thank you.
I have a question.
So just for clarity, Mr. Mayor,
Wait, Dr. Whitaker has the floor?
Yeah.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
So I'm assuming there's more presentation coming that's going to show what the fiscal impact is of implementing collective bargaining.
Yes, sir.
Right, and that'll be tonight as well.
Yes, sir.
Right, and so the reason you were out when I asked the question about the relationship. That's what I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding is that we're getting this information as we get annually, but also it does have to be taken into account because there are some fiscal impacts that are going to occur that also is going to impact our present payouts. And so I'm comfortable with what I asked and the response that was given.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Hugel, sir, you have the floor.
yeah, thanks, sir. So just for clarity, we're getting this brief because we always get this brief this time of year, but the fact is, this brief wouldn't be any different if we were in collective bargaining or not in collective bargaining, because it's a bill that we pay to cover legacy retirement folks, and we're going to pay that bill whether we're in collective bargaining or not. True?
True, but every
Okay.
year, there's just like he mentioned, and he'll continue, that there's some costs associated and it increases. So if there's a loss in stock, if it's a loss in there, these things impact what our bottom line is regardless. So, correct, it's no matter what, you would get this presentation. Just happened to fall on tonight.
Yeah.
And it is the old police and fire retirement system.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please continue.
All right, thank you.
John.
I have a similar slide to show where we are fiscal year to date. So this represents the 3-month period ending September 30, 2023. So a little down market and that's really impacting the funded status, but still early in the year, and we'll continue to review this and update this at the end of the fiscal year. The next slide, next slide here. Wanted to highlight the payouts that come out of the plan. Mentioned that the benefit payments in the neighborhood of about $30 million a year. A significant portion of the plan assets are currently held. This is a projection of those payouts over the next 40, 50 years. And the thing to highlight is that those benefit payments are still going to remain at a relatively high level in the 20 to 25 million in about the next, continuing over the next 10 years, but start to steadily decline as the system progresses. When we look at the actuarial determined contribution, so that is one of the purposes of the annual valuation is to come up with a recommendation for what the city will put into the plan on an annual basis to help ensure the solvency. That contribution is $8.4 million for fiscal 2024. We project that to steadily increase to about $11 million annually over the next few years.
Excuse me, sir, can I ask
Yes,
a
sir.
question? I wanted to ask a
Yes,
question
sir.
of the manager. What are we currently paying to service the debt? Currently, this program right now? What are we paying on a monthly basis? Do we know?
Is that the obligation bond? I'm sorry, I do not have that information.
I mean, what are we paying
What
in?
is it, Trey? 10 million.
10 million a year
That's just on the pension.
obligation bond?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, I guess I just want to understand it from a dollar amount.
Yes, sir.
When you say the increase, the 8 million to 10 million annually over the next few years, what is that related to?
That's the actual determined contribution, so the projection of the, I'll go to the last bullet point.
Okay, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
you're okay.
I'll follow you.
So the current goal or method of the system is, a system was put in place approximately, I think, 20 or so years ago, that deficit would be funded over a 30-year period. So somewhat analogous to a mortgage payment, if you can think of it like that.
Right.
So the contributions are determined using the liabilities of the plan. Those are projected to remain relatively steadily decreasing. You will see some gains and losses on an annual basis, but that should be relatively small. The bigger driver, what you'll see here, is really the assets. That's going to drive the funded status on an annual basis. It'll go up and down with market movement. But the expectation is that over the long run, the fund will earn that 7.25%. So the deficit in the plan that currently exists is going to be made up through either excess earnings or contributions that the city puts in to help fund the existing deficit. So the current method or system that exists is that contributions will be made on an annual basis, again, somewhat similar to like a mortgage payment, over the next, I think we're at 13 years now, to help fund that gap. On the current year's valuation, that number is $8.4 million. The way that the contribution is determined, and Mr. Shanley mentioned this earlier about the different asset values, is we use what's called an actuarial value of assets. So that smooths in some of the gains and losses that occur in the market on an annual basis. Those are eventually recognized, but the purpose of the actuarial value is to create a little bit more smoother pattern so that as the market goes up and down, your actuarial value of assets is relatively stable, or as stable can be with movement market. So the increase that you see from the 8 to 11 really represents the phasing in of some of those losses that we saw during 2022 when markets were down. So we currently project that 8.4 will increase a little over the next, I believe it's 3 or 4 years, as some of those asset losses become recognized in the method, and then it should level out in the 10 to 11 million range through 2037, with the goal of having the systems 100% funded at that time. All right. That's everything I have on the, I guess we'll call it the liability side of the house. So if there are no further questions, I'll turn it over to Mr. Birnbaum. All right, thank you very much.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, City Council, staff. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening again. It's good to see everybody in person. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the asset side and the performance, the investment performance of the plan. I've got a few slides that are going to go into some detail on that. I first wanted to provide a little bit of overview on who Greystone Consulting is. As was communicated, we are part of Morgan Stanley. We are the institutional consulting division within Morgan Stanley. So that means we work with pension funds and charities and insurance companies and helping them manage their assets. We were formed in 1973. Clearly, Morgan Stanley's been around a lot longer than 1973, but our organization, the institutional consulting piece, was formed in 1973. We consult, this is a little bit stale number, I saw in a new number, updated number this morning. We consult over $500 billion in client assets, so investors that look an awful lot like the retirement system here. We provide customized solutions, asset allocation advice, manager selection, portfolio construction for all of our clients. Any investments we do make are with firms that are not Morgan Stanley, and that's important from a conflict of interest perspective. We scour the world to find the very best managers around the globe and bring those to the retirement system and our other clients. We've been working with the board, retirement board, since 2016, and our relationship has evolved over time. And we reference here at the end of October of 2018, we have been employed in what's referred to as a discretionary investment mandate. Now, what does that mean? It means we work with the board and they set investment policy, broad asset allocation strategy, and then they hand it off to us. And we go out and we hire and fire managers and we move the portfolio around within the confines of the board approved and adopted investment policy statement. I want to touch on asset allocation, how we're currently allocating the assets. We've got about 70% of our portfolio in stocks, mostly U.S. stocks. We do have some exposure outside of this country as well. We have about a little bit less than 25% of our portfolio allocated to bonds, all U.S. bonds, and we have about 8% of the portfolio allocated to alternative investments. That's mostly in real estate, quite frankly. When we compare that allocation relative to the common practices around the country, so what is the average public fund doing? That's the light blue bars on this chart. You can see a dramatically lower allocation to stocks and a dramatically higher allocation to alternative investments. You can see almost 30% of the average public fund is allocated to alternative investments. That's investing in private companies, it's investing in real estate, it's investing in hedge funds. As we talked about earlier, this is a closed system and a frozen system. That means liquidity is very important to us. We're spending upwards of $30 million a year in benefit payments, and so we need to be able to access those assets on a moment's notice. When you invest in alternatives, it's very illiquid. You don't have access to that capital. You might not have access to that capital for 10 to 15 years or longer. That's a big reason why you don't see a big bar for us in alternatives. The other interesting thing about alternative investments is that an individual in our industry is named Richard Ennis. He basically started the investment consulting industry. He happened to be my mentor early on in my career. He's done a lot of research in using statistical techniques to see if he can replicate a portfolio that has a lot of alternatives with just in stocks and bonds. That's what that effective asset mix looks at. It looks through the alternatives exposure and tries to reallocate it to the other asset classes that we all know and understand well. And the outcome of that research is to say that on average, even though these public funds have 30% in alternatives, it's basically the same thing as having a portfolio that has 72% in stocks and 28% in bonds. So the implication of that is the strategy that we're implementing for the retirement system is almost exactly in line with what the average public fund is doing. Not that we strive to do what everybody else is doing, but it's important to understand where we are relative to what others are doing, given the public nature of public pension investing. Here's a quick look at plan year performance. We go back to 2013, and the way to read this chart is each of those individual years is the 12-month return ending June 30. So June 30 of 2013, the retirement system earned a 12% return, net of all fees and expenses. We have a benchmark that we're measured against and we're managing to. That return was 6.9% over the same period, the difference being 5.1%. I'll come all the way down to the bottom of that first grouping of numbers. The actuarial return assumption is 7.25%. So that means as the actuary does projections about how the assets are going to perform in the future to see if we have enough assets today to cover those benefit expenses, payments, they're assuming we're going to earn 7.25% return. I can tell you we're not going to earn 7.25% return each and every year. That's not how the capital markets operate. In fact, you can see in 2022 was a very challenging year. We all know why. Inflation was highest it's been in 40 years. Stock market had historic losses. The bond market has historic losses. Those things happen in any given year. However, what we do strive to do is to generate a return over a long period of time that's going to meet and exceed that actuarial return expectation. For the plan year 2023, we earned a 10.1% return, better than the 7.25. We were a little bit behind what our benchmark was, but from an actuarial perspective, that's a big reason why the funded status improved from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23. When you look over longer periods of time, and that's shown in the last three rows of this table, the discretionary period when our relationship with the retirement board evolved to be one of a discretionary manager. We can hire and fire managers on our own, certainly tell the board that we're doing that and what we're doing. 7.4% return net of all fees, higher than the 7.25. The last 5 years, 7%, just short. And since we've been involved with the city going back to the spring of 2016, the average annual return net of all fees was exactly on top of what the actuarial expectation was. So this is a good outcome. This is what was expected. We were able to participate in capital markets when they were strong. We were able to generate the returns that were required to bring the system to fully funded. We've got a ways to go, as you heard from John, but at least over the last, whatever that is, 7 years or so, it's been a good outcome. Last thing I want to point here is, I mentioned earlier, we don't manage to what other public retirement systems are doing, but we compare the return that we've been able to generate relative to the returns that are being generated in the industry, but outside of Portsmouth. We have access to a universe of public fund returns. These are actual returns earned by plans that are very similar to Portsmouth, scattered all around the country. They're statewide plans, they're municipal plans, they're teacher plans, fire and police, et cetera. It's an organization it's a universe that's called Investment Metrics. And over the last year, for the 12 months ending June 30, 2023, there were 465 plans within that universe. So this is one of the broadest and most deep universes of returns that are earned in the public sector. The way to look about this blue bar, think about this blue bar, is this is the distribution of returns earned by everybody else. Our black triangle there is our return. We earned a 10.1% return. It's at the top. That means our return over that period of time was better than pretty much everybody else. A good outcome. When you look over the last 5 years, the distribution gets a little bit skinnier, and this is what we see over time. The longer the time period you have, the less extreme outcomes you tend to find. Our return over that period was 7%, slightly behind the actuarial assumption. If we looked at the full period I mentioned earlier, we exactly matched it. But our return, that 7% return, ranked at the 25th percentile. So we did better than 75% of the other public retirement systems around the country. So a lot of credit and the progress that have been made goes to the board, goes to the city of Portsmouth for continuing to fund the system. Investments are doing what we would expect, and we're closing that gap. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions from my colleagues on council? Councilman Hugel, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Actually, my question is for Mr. Morrison. So on your observation slide, the very last bullet, you say the current funding method will drive the systems to 100% funded by the year 2037.
Yes, sir.
So why 2037, not 2030, 2040, 2050. I mean, the payout slide that you provided shows that we don't really need to get to 100% until well after 2037. It'd be nice to be at 100% today, so why 2037?
Sure. So there's two answers to that. One is the system that was put in place years ago had recommended amortizing that or closing that gap over a 30-year period. That was back in 2007, so this is where we are in the benchmark.
Okay.
What we see in this graph, the projected outflows, as you can see, most of the payments are front-loaded. The period to 2037 is actually very consistent with the expected lifetime of the remaining retirees that are in the plan. So about, on average, the length of time that you expect a payout to go for those participants. So a best practice is typically to amortize those losses around the average lifetime of your participants, and that's about where the 2037 and that 14-year period comes into play.
And is there anything that requires us to be at 100% by 2037? So if there was a dial to adjust, it's available for us to work with you to adjust?
That's my understanding. I don't believe there's a requirement, but that's the existing policy that's in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
The next presentation will be from our financial advisor, Davenport. David Rose will begin.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I do have a handout. It's going to be on the screen, but if anyone likes to write or mark it up, perhaps.
Is that this? Yes. Okay.
While the officer is handing this out, I would just point out just a little commentary on the previous gentleman's presentation. We do have a policy. It's 80%. We're not there right now, but that is actually a formal policy of the city. It was put in place when we did those pension obligation bonds several years ago. Okay. Again, Mayor, pleasure to be back here.
Good to see you, Ms. Rose.
Thank you. Again, David Rose. I'm with Davenport. I'm the managing partner there. And what I'd like to do tonight is just address some financial implications and considerations. I'm certainly not here to say whether this is good or bad. That's not my purview, but rather to try to provide some information for all of you to consider as part of your ongoing deliberations. So with that said, a little bit of background for those that are watching and may have not seen Davenport and myself in the past. We've worked with the city as your financial advisor for probably about 15 or 16 years now. So we said at least a decade. We try to stay out of your politics, but rather just give you some information that is as close to just being factual as possible. If I don't know the answers, I'm certainly going to tell you that, try to get you those answers, but the bottom line is I just want to provide some input as, again, you do your deliberations, whether it's budgets, whether it's capital planning, whether it's overall policies like one I just mentioned that you have as it relates to pensions. So with that said, on the second part of that basic handout here and the screen, we were asked to come behind the Jackson Lewis Law Firm and talk a little bit again of the financial side of what this might mean to the city going forward. So I would like to touch on maybe three general areas tonight. I will not be overly long. The first will be the general fund. The second will be local funding to schools, of which, of course, it comes from the general fund. And then third, something that the gentleman, Mr. O'Connor, talked a little bit about, and that is the future and current credit ratings that the city enjoys. In spite of the fact that we are the single largest local government that has non-taxable property, as the mayor indicated, 50% roughly. Nevertheless, by the things that you have done and continue to do, we enjoy very solid credit ratings. We are basically one tier below AAA, which is the highest credit ratings that you can get. Part of why you are there is because you have paid attention to and followed the majority of your policies today. That wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago. And you know I've told you that before, and we've talked about that. So with that said, let me just talk first about the general fund. The general fund is roughly about $300 million. That's your FY 2024 budget that you're in right now. Of that, some 45% of that is tied to compensation, what we define as salary and benefits. Put that together, that's about $135 million. So as we indicated, the gentleman before indicated, the board, y'all, council, I should say, approved a 7% wage increase in that. Certainly, it's one of the reasons why you're very competitive within the region as it relates to compensation. And just this is where I'm trying to be a little bit of education for everyone. When you look at that, if you had a 1% adjustment, so you did 7, but a 1% adjustment is a little over $1.35 million to the general fund. So just to give you a perspective, every penny on the real estate rate, using that as an indicator, is about $1 million. So if you think about it, you basically gave well over 7 to 8 penny equivalent towards increases with regard to compensation this past year that you're in right now. So that said, I want to give you a sense of what all does that mean, those numbers being thrown at you, and you'll see where I'm getting with, and I hope you will in a few moments. So in the last 5 years, basically, we have taken our rainy day fund, meaning that fund balance, which is so critical for us to have a good, solid credit rating, and we have added $20 million to that over the last 5 years. We can always get you the year-by-year details, but just suffice to say we have averaged about $5 million because this council has been structurally balanced. You've added to the fund balance over the 5 years. Now, why is that important? Because you've averaged $5 million a year. Having said that, though, the bullet right below that is a little bit something to me is sobering. And that is that if we were to go forward and think about a 5% increase in compensation, that alone would more than eclipse your surplus in a given year. It'd be almost $7 million. So the point I'm making is, while the last several years have been very positive, we've had ARPA, we've had CARES Act, and you've done a number of things. The reality is, while we've been averaging $5 million, that could very quickly evaporate. And you all know, many of you know, I started working with the city when you were in a deficit position back some 14, 15 years ago. So one of the things I just want to be careful about when it comes to a collective bargaining is that it can put some impacts on cash flow requirements. And that's something that we just want to be careful of and want you to make sure you take that into consideration. So, City of Portsmouth Public Schools, that second area I wanted to touch upon. As you know, we here in the Commonwealth are required local minimums. We have to do certain funding, whether we like it or not. And you can see here that in this current fiscal year that we're at, the school budget, about $250 million, 60% of that is compensation, salary and benefits, and that's about $145 million. You, on the other hand, have been providing some $63 million to the schools, and again, that is essentially largely salary and benefits and what have you. They, of course, use that in their various categories. That does not include the debt service for the things that you've helped them with. That's just, again, those other categories. So once again, a 5% increase, let's say, in what you might give the schools would be a multi-million-dollar impact to your general fund. Again, I'm not here saying that's good or bad. I just want to make sure everyone understands that when you look at percentages, you can go considerably below 7%, and still that could eat up any of the surplus that you enjoyed very, very quickly in a given year. So let's talk about the rating agencies. As you know, the city enjoys them. As I mentioned right now, didn't always be the case. When we were first involved and engaged, the ratings actually went down because there was a structural deficit. But one of the reasons why in Virginia we enjoy very strong credit ratings is that we have very solid flexibility thanks to the Commonwealth and the legislature with regard to revenue creation and expense management. So with that said, you look here, and Fitch, which is one of the three major rating agencies, they have you rated, indicated and put in record, and we've got that report if you'd like it, they indicated that that combination of the House and Senate bill, which is now in effect, said to somewhat weaken your expenditure flexibility for the Commonwealth and its local governments. So let's make no mistake, anytime something like collective bargaining is put into the mix, it may be very good for you, but it will impact your flexibility. You will not typically see collective bargaining done on an annual basis. Goes to one of the council members indicated, we're talking about a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of dollars, and so it's not practical to do collective bargaining every year. But what it is usually something between 3 and 5 years. And that said, one of the things that in talking to Jackson Lewis, and I've got this a little bit later, but I think the timing is right to say it, once you get into that collective bargaining and you've got an agreement, it is virtually impossible to undo that agreement. I understand and I appreciate the gentleman talking about how various local governments, I'll give you one, I lived for a while after school up in New York, and the wealthiest county, perhaps, one of the wealthiest counties is Nassau County. And they actually went bankrupt, and yet the police union there refused to change their compensation. At one time, they were at the same time, Nassau County, which is a wealthy county, was basically bankrupt, had a non-credit rating, not credit, excuse me, a non-rated credit. They were below credit rating of what we call investment grade. They just stood their ground and said, too bad, this is our agreement, this is the way it works, pay us. And they at one time were the best paid police in the entire country. So again, may have changed dramatically, I don't know. But again, from my perspective, you look at that green part, all I'm simply saying is that collective bargaining has the ability to just put another belt and suspenders on your flexibility. Again, it may be good for Portsmouth and what have you, but at least the credit rating agencies are somewhat concerned that, again, it just takes some of your flexibility. And they talk about that lower down, as I quote, and they say, Fitch's assessment of expenditure flexibility considers the following: the impact of debt service and retiree benefit costs on the budget, something you just had, in addition to levels of pay-as-you-go capital investment and other non-core spending the government may be able to defer during a period of fiscal stress. So again, this won't be a positive for us, but nevertheless.
Excuse me, Mr. Rose. I think a couple of years ago, I remember we had a presentation that talked about fiscal stress, our fiscal stress, and there was a rating. Do you recall that, Ms. Terry, about in the region where we were in a fiscal stress situation? And if I recall, Portsmouth had a high level of fiscal stress at that time, And I don't know, we probably haven't seen an updated form that indicated that, but I would suggest that we probably still have a high level of fiscal stress. Is that fair?
Yes, Mayor. So interesting you say that. I think I may have that document.
Okay.
It may be in the car, but
Okay.
but I do have that document, the most recent, and I will say that I do have that recollection. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
hold on, Mr. Rose. Dr.
Yeah.
Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, Mr. Rose.
Yes, sir.
You made a statement there I just want to follow up on. You said although collective bargaining will not be annually, but what will be annually is that there will be a structure that the city will have to put in place that will involve additional compensation to employees, which would, as you said, will have an impact. So although it may not occur annually, we still would have to have in place a structure, human resource-wise, to address the collective bargaining. So that would still be an annual expense.
You know, Dr. Whitaker, let me say one thing, because I did speak incorrectly if I said that. What I really meant to say was, it's not practical to do annual collective bargaining. It could be. I don't know of another place that does it annually, but the point is, what we are typically seeing is something in a 3 to 5 year time period, because it is so onerous and cumbersome to do, you know, negotiations. That doesn't mean they're not good, but that's right. We typically are seeing them over several years.
Well, my point is, regardless whether it's annually or 3 years, you still have to have a structure in place that's going to require compensation, which, from what you're saying and what the mayor just mentioned about fiscal stress, it would have a significant impact on the city financially. And so I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on that and what I heard as far as, although it may not or may, it still requires a structure to be put in place.
Again, my role here is I worry about the dollars and cents. I've never been elected, obviously, and I probably wouldn't be. But what I'm worried about for any local government, particularly the city of Portsmouth, and knowing the history of the city of Portsmouth financially, is that while we're enjoying right now a surplus, while we're enjoying structural balance, I know it can turn very, very quickly. And so with that said, what I'm concerned about, which is what Fitch and the rating agencies are concerned about, is it all sounds great. You know, this is a nice union and we'll work with you and we'll make sure everything works. Again, I lived in New York when that was the exact opposite, and there was a wealthy community, Nassau County, growing, prosperous, and it couldn't borrow other than junk bond status because its unions were so strong and so powerful. Because the other factor is, once you get into a collective bargaining, the experience, and we're talking to Jackson Lewis about this, it practically speaking, you're really never going to extricate yourself. The way to get out of that, it's very difficult to comprehend, but it could happen. But so I just want to make sure that y'all are knowing when you walk into this that it will be more rigid than a year-to-year working of this council. That's the only part. And if you do it, that's your business.
Right, and when you speak about the impact on the surplus,
right,
what impact does that have on bond rating?
So that's a great question. So typically, the rating agencies, their number one consideration is available cash. They look at cash and equivalents, meaning your fund balances, and you're meeting your fund balance policy, which several years ago you were not. Now you're there and you exceed it. You're in really very good shape, as I've presented to you before, Dr. Whitaker. So from the rating agency standpoint, if you don't have structural balance, that's sort of almost 1A. If you know, one is having dollars, having available dollars, a rainy day fund, if you would. We call that your unassigned fund balance, and that's what you're in good shape. But then number 1A is that you have a structurally balanced budget. And really all I'm saying here is that if you are able to control your own destiny, and that means that you get to go directly to your folks in terms of your workforce, and can be more flexible and nimble versus something that was created. Imagine this. Imagine if you ended up in collective bargaining 1 year or 1 month before you had COVID hit. I mean, could you just imagine a required 3 or 5 year period of increases? Or years ago, you had layoffs, you had furloughs, you had any number of things that you had to do. All of those undoubtedly are not going to be something that are going to be possible going forward. I mean, they may say that there's examples, but
And so the impact of, the impact on the bond rating, just so the citizens, and what does that do financially to the city?
So that is directly tied to your tax rate and your ability to take care of not only service the debt, which would be higher if your ratings are lower, or were higher when your ratings were lower, but also as you improved your ratings. You may recall I was in front of y'all multiple times to refinance because we're able to lower the costs of our debt. So that is one of those vestiges of having a really strong credit rating, is that you were so desirable in the marketplace for investors. That's not the case everywhere in the Commonwealth. We don't, as you know. So it's really about saving dollars. It's really about being more competitive. It's really about having more dollars to go to be able to do a 7% raise on your own volition versus having some experts that construct an agreement for multiple years. So the last thing I would point out is when we see it here, yes, Virginia Beach is one of my clients, and when we hear some discussion, I'm not as close to that. I don't do the day-to-day of the Virginia Beach as one of my colleagues does. But by and large, where we're seeing this and where it has moved forward is up in Northern Virginia. We see several places. What I don't have here for you is any of the places that have said thank you but no thank you as it relates to collective bargaining. I can tell you, because I represent probably 3/4 of all the counties in the state, in the Commonwealth. The majority of them have said no thank you. For the moment, that could always change, but much more have said no than said yes. So again, but doesn't make it right or wrong. Every local government's different, so. I think I'll end there if that's okay.
Hold on, we have a couple more colleagues have questions. Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Rhodes, for the presentation to this point. I guess my question was with the general fund as well. You referenced the 5% increase in the compensation being tied to the bond rating, and that's in the event that we do nothing, that we don't continue to have revenues to come in through businesses and entertainment venues and other opportunities that the city would work with. That is just, if we just stop working altogether, that 5% would impact our bond rating.
It could, and I think, again, it's going to be a pattern, Vice Mayor, meaning 1 year, I won't see us having our credit rating lost in a 1 year. But I think if we show a pattern of a couple, 3 years, then certainly they will not look at us with the strengths they see, which is, again, structural balance and adding to fund balance. Those things would no longer be realistic. In fact, if anything, we might be taking away from fund balance to just take care of existing payments.
Right.
So, again, we've all seen this change very quickly. So again, you know me, I'm conservative.
Right.
So I just want to make sure y'all know.
Yeah, but we're here to make sure that we do everything to make sure our city stays sound as well, and that includes keeping our revenues and our businesses and any other options that would bring additional revenue back to the city so that we can continue to invest into that bond, that general fund. But also that there's something called midterm bargaining where if there's something that's not going right, we could take a look at that. And then also the council is going to be responsible for writing into our bargaining agreement what we would like or what we would not like. So that would be an opportunity for us to address some of those concerns at that time, whether the fund balance goes below a certain amount that we would have to put a halt on a contract or something to that effect. So
I hear you.
Councilman Hugo, you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Mr. Rose, for the presentation. This was really a very important aspect that we need to look at carefully. So on the general fund slide, in one place you mentioned that we have done a 7% wage increase in this fiscal year. Another place you say, but a 5% increase would chew up more than our kind of average surplus. Well, in fact, I think even though we've done a 7% raise, we're still tracking toward a surplus this year.
That's right.
And so to the Vice Mayor's point, if we don't turn any other knobs and we just let this go, then we're headed to disaster potentially. But the fact is, we are going to turn other knobs, which is what was done in order to allow us to do a 7% pay raise and continue to contribute toward the accumulation in the fund balance. In the school slide, I think it's worth pointing out that whether City Council elects to or elects to not go to collective bargaining has no impact on the schools and school compensation, because collective bargaining in the school system is the school board's call, not our call. So any decision that we make will have no impact there. Now, it's worth pointing out that in our discussions with the school superintendent, they're currently doing a salary survey because of their concern about teacher salaries and other salaries in the school system. So we probably should anticipate that we're going to see some financial pressure from the schools coming back to us, but collective bargaining or no collective bargaining, we're going to see that because I think they're going to find that they're out of kilter. Now, the good news is, I think that our 7% increase has put us back in kilter. And so again, as the Vice Mayor said, when we sit down at the table, kind of the starting place in the compensation discussions is, well, how are we doing compared to other communities in the area? And if we're in the ballpark, and that raise is going to absolutely put us in the ballpark, then the opening salvo ought not to be what Richmond's going through, which is opening salvo. We need an 11% compensation increase across the board, which is costing them a whole lot of money. But when they did their salary survey, they discovered, in fact, they hadn't fixed their salaries the way that we have addressed our city salaries and public safety salaries over the last couple of years. One other comment. So back in your other considerations, you mentioned that if we have an agreement, it's probably going to be a 3 to 5 year agreement. I agree with that. It does lock us in, kind of. Okay, so the Virginia statute has a financial escape clause. So using your COVID example, if COVID were to hit, you can be darn sure that we're going to go back to the table and say, hey, we've looked at our city finances and something that got baked into the collective bargaining agreement compensation-wise across that 3-year period, let's say, null and void ain't going to work because it's going to bankrupt the city. So there is that escape clause that's important in the Virginia statute and in city council hands to, again, another lever that is available to use in, if we need to pull the ejection handle. So I'm offering you the opportunity to make any comments to my comments, but I think those are.
Well, I personally appreciate your comments, Admiral. Again, I think you hit on it, and that is the first way you go into that collective bargaining is going to be critical because it will set the stage for years to come.
Yeah.
So I think we want to be careful that it is really, as the gentleman said, it really is in our favor meaning the local government, because I've seen the worm turn, over 43, 44 years that I've been doing this, and, it happens. So we just have to be careful. Like I said, it may be very, very good for Portsmouth as long as we're going in wide-eyed, and it sounds like a lot of you are thinking that way, is that we're going to be very prudent and not expect every year to be better than the previous year. I mean, it's interesting that right now you look at it and sort of every single year we see increases in assessed value in general throughout the Commonwealth. But We also remember when those things were not the case. So when we get that kind of negative, I just want to make sure we're ready for it. So again, I don't have a dog in the fight other than I just want to make sure that if I'm still asked to come back in 3 or 4 years and things are moving to the negative, we have the ability to sort of really do that and not be a really contentious situation. That's important to me.
Yes, sir. So this brief that you provided us tonight is the shot across the bow to remind us to go into this wide-eyed and carefully
Yes, sir.
if we make that decision.
Yes, sir.
So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. So Vice Mayor Lisa Lucas Burke and Councilman Mark Hugel, they kind of hit on some of my points already, but it was made mention, and I just want to put some clarity to this, that while Portsmouth is considered to be one of the most physically stressed cities in the region, that in a presentation that was given to City Council in November of 2018, it was made mention as a key takeaway, and the statement was Portsmouth ranks the most physically stressed city in the region, possesses the highest percentage of tax-exempt property, and has the highest dependency ratio, yet the city imposes a comparable or even lower tax burden in the context of income for the two commonly cited measures of tax burden. And so I just want to say that while we may be fiscally strapped, based on our city's policies and tax policies, we're doing a good job.
Absolutely.
Compared to other cities. So I don't want the narrative that we are physically strapped, that we have no money, to be a narrative that's being cast out to the public.
Well, let me underscore that to your point. Okay, that's why you have strong credit ratings. You have good dollars in the bank that are over and above your policies. And like I said, you run structurally balanced. And on top of that, you have, again, proven year in and year out that you operate within your means. So all of that is important, and the citizens should heed what you're saying, and hopefully they hear what I'm trying to reiterate, which is that's the case. All I'm also saying is I remember some of the darker days, whether it was here, whether it was Hampton, whether it was any number of places. And when we just know there's really tough times, we just want to make sure that we've got those cushions in place, we've got the safeguard in place, as the Admiral said, shot across the bow. And I'm just trying to make sure, that's why I wear dark suits, because, economists, famous economist from many years ago, Thomas Malthus, he said, economics is the dismal science. That's what he called it. So that's why I wear a dark suit, so that's how we do it. But on a serious note, yes, the city works with its means, and it just has to be careful. It's not easy for us meaning the city, to do as other places might say, we'll just add some tax rate to it. That's not easy for us to do, as you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, most definitely, and I appreciate that because one thing that we've been getting from a lot of the presentations, which the state code states, is that it's up to the municipality on how collective bargaining comes about. And so the fact that we have done right throughout the last, at least since 2018, with our policies internally, shows, and to me that gives confidence to the public that we will do right as far as the policies as we're considering collective bargaining, and that we have that ability, as was mentioned, to turn the knobs to what needs to be funded here and X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And so I just want to give that confidence to the public that we are in good standing, and we're going to continue to stay in good standing while we do the due diligence to work towards what needs to be done. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Councilman Moody, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Mr. Rose. You mentioned a penny is worth a million. I think you and I can remember in Portsmouth when a penny was worth in the 400,000 level. So, and I think that's indicative of the growth that we've had, fiscal growth, revenue growth that we've had as a city. With that said, and I think the Vice Mayor mentioned it, these numbers pertain to no growth as things stay the same. But I would also think in a 3 to 5 year contract, that it would be good from a fiscal planning standpoint to know what your payroll expense is going to be going forward. I think something can be said for that. Is that not
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things the rating agencies like is to see a 5-year forecast
Right.
under different scenarios. So I think that would be an excellent way to do that, Councilman, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think with the safeguards that we all have mentioned that would need to be in an ordinance, I think to protect us from any fiscal calamity or natural disaster, whatever comes down the pike. I think if we have that in the ordinance, I think that'll be the important document to help protect us from anything like that. And I would like to think that the people that would be on the other side of the table, they would be willing to understand the need for that as well.
Well, again, I like the way y'all are thinking about making sure, whoever negotiates, attorney or whatever, that you memorialize it and make it clear and try to make sure you take into consideration things that may seem very remote but are very possible. So again, if we can be of help, you know where I am on that. But I'm certainly no negotiator. I'm not trying to. I'm busy enough as it is. But to the extent we can throw in a two cents, we're happy to do that.
Thanks.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Rose, I've heard you make presentations over the years to council, and what I heard you address and say is not a shot across the bow. I don't think you were just giving us a warning shot to be aware. It sounded like you were a little more specific than that. And I think that, again, that council needs to address the question, and the citizens do too, is what is it that spending all of the millions of dollars for collective bargaining, what is it going to gain that the firefighters and police already don't have? I think that's a very relevant question, and I haven't heard anything in any presentation that would justify spending those millions of dollars for what's already being achieved. The other issue is one I raised earlier with Mr. O'Connell, and that was the public versus private. The expenses that the private sector incurs because of requests for increased salaries, that's passed on to the consumer through increase in pricing. Well, if council has to do that, that's passed on to the taxpayers. However, increasing the price of bread by 5 cents versus increasing your tax rate, that's a big difference. And so I just want to say that there's a knob out here. I keep hearing about these knobs that are going to be turned. There's a knob that I think we have to be very conscious of, and that is our school system. The buildings, the staffing, the state has already significantly cut our school system, and it never caught up. And so that's a knob that's out here in a city such as ours that will always have to have significant attention, and I don't want us to overlook that. And so I don't see this as a shot over the bow. I see it as something very emphatically that you quoting bond rating agencies with caution, and so.
Again, I appreciate Mr. Whitaker, Dr. Whitaker. I mean, again, you're making a number of points, and that really is the purview of you and your colleagues. That's really not my world at all. It's just not. But what my world is again, and that's why I appreciate a very robust discussion tonight, that I feel like hopefully if I've done one little thing tonight, and that is to say, let's try to be extra vigilant if and when you go into collective bargaining, we have those outs. We have it away from just what the state or the Commonwealth may say is a proviso that we can do. I would personally like to make sure it's in there explicitly with certain different maybe examples or what have you. Again, showing my naivete, I'm not a negotiator. That's not my world. But what I do know, again, is there'll be some cautionary issues for the rating agencies. They're not fatal by any means. If they were, that would be a whole nother kettle of fish. But we just have to make sure this doesn't look like Son of Nassau County, which was, again, just from my perspective, just a calamity. I mean, crazy to see that happen. And I have a son in law enforcement, so I understand, again, making sure they're taken care of. But again, I just think that there's a balance here, and if y'all are going to work towards that, I get it.
Right. And there hasn't been any, I would say, facts presented that the fire nor police have not been taken care of.
You didn't, I'll say something.
Well, I was.
Okay, let me go ahead. Mr. Rose, I did have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
In talking about the fund balance and how we utilize those dollars, I was thinking about, we just, this past May, we had voted on a reduction in our tax rate. As you were aware, we had one of the highest tax rates, property tax rates in the region, and we did a 5-cent reduction.
Yes, sir.
Credit. And so when we're thinking about these things, because I understand, and I know you're not the negotiator, but I just want to remind the citizens that collective bargaining is a negotiation process. And people don't have to agree. And when people don't agree, it all sounds good, but when people don't agree, just like me and my wife don't agree all the time, things can get a little bit conflicted. The reason I want to make that statement is because what we're essentially doing is, in our city, we're doing well financially, but as we talked about, I'm a financial guy too, in the terms of I want to make sure I have enough in the kitty in the worst case scenario. And we have a lot of our citizens who are aging. We have a lot of our underserved citizens. We have other competing needs, as Dr. Whitaker was saying. And if at this time, and I know you don't deal with the collective bargaining piece, if there is not a compelling reason why we should enter into another financial obligation, because this will be a financial obligation, why would one enter in something like that based on your experience? Do municipalities behave that way generally?
You ask a very good question, Mayor. It seems to me, and I don't know the answer here, but what I believe is with your adjustments in '24, fiscal year '24, you have moved very much into a highly competitive area in terms of compensation in the Hampton Roads area, in this area. I may be wrong about that, but that's sort of what when I take a step back, I believe that's the case, all right? So if I'm wrong, please tell me, and I would say to the interim city manager, correct me. But that's what I see, at least from the outside, if I'm understanding it. So that really then begs the question, will having collective bargaining make it so that you're not going to see as much bleed from some of the various, we'll call it employees, workforce? That's you ask about the compelling element is if that's going to be something that could be helpful, but if you're not seeing that right now, I'm a simple guy. I don't really know what collective bargaining does if the workforce is happy, if they're being competitively compensated and they're being properly treated. But again, that's me as an outsider.
Has asked for the floor, so ma'am, you have the floor.
And I'll do this, and then I have a portion of my presentation to do as what, can you hear me?
No, not really. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll ask this question, but when you say if we do nothing and we stand still, we are, it looks like we will be on our average, but this city is actually not standing still. Right. Again, we're looking at a reduction of real estate taxes. Assessments may go up or down, it just depends on the market. we are definitely competitive in our wages because we want to retain the best and the brightest for this organization. But we also know that down the road, we'll be acquiring more debt. And so those things, and with debt comes debt service payments, which will increase. So it's just making the statement, I understand that, you know, we don't have a crystal ball to see in the future, but we know the current requirement, well, we know currently the priorities we have for the city and the fiscal impact of those, and adding another debt service, because I'll call it that, because there are some additional expenses that may come along with wanting more pension benefits and some other things. And again, I want to remind us that this is just not for fire. Right. This would be across the board. I think we just get caught up because fire has a union right now that came and spoke before us. But we're talking about across the citywide, not just one organization that would be able to unionize. So I guess that was more of a statement than a question, because when we say if we do nothing else, but we're doing other things. And just being able to see additional revenue streams when we are now looking at a reduction in real estate tax to benefit and give a relief to our citizens is where we're trying to invest our dollars. So if you have anything else, no, I can go ahead with my portion of the presentation.
I don't think there's anything else. I appreciate it, and thank you for
Thank you so
letting me
much.
Mr. Rose, thank you as always,
so
sir.
much. All right, thank you.
Ms. Terry, you have the floor.
If it would please council, I would like to do my portion of the presentation before you.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
Again, good evening, Portsmouth family. This is the portion of the presentation where I am going to try to summarize some things and answer the questions, or hopefully with an attempt to answer some of the questions that council had that I really didn't hear answered during the portions of presentations that we actually had over the course of several weeks. Can you hear me? So I want to start with saying, what are our options? Tonight, what I'm asking, or what we are here to do, is to approve collective bargaining by an adoption or a resolution of a resolution or ordinance, or reject collective bargaining by adoption of a resolution or ordinance. Who can participate? We went over that. Again, I would just want to remind council and the public that we're looking at all city employees are able to unionize, would be required to participate. No elected officials, constitutional officers, nor their employees would be allowed to participate. What has the city currently provided citywide? This has been a question that has been asked. So when we look at this, when I first came back in 2020 and back in 2023, we had a vacancy rate in many of the departments that was about 66% vacant. So we're trying to right-size our organization. I remember fire came up, the chief, and did a presentation saying they were reduced, they had very few applicants for firefighters. Now there is actually a waiting list to become a firefighter because we don't have any positions available. Address employee class and compensation pay. We've done that for all public safety as well as for city employees, and that will continue to be ongoing. The city has absorbed the increased cost of health insurance premiums over the past 3 years. What used to happen is increases with health insurance would go up, and then the employees would get a general wage increase, and that would absorb their increase. So the city has absorbed the increase in health insurance costs by adding some additional plans in that have been able to leverage the increase in cost every year, so our employees can actually see an increase. Provided additional annual general wage increases for employees. We've done that over the past 3 years that I've been here. We matched what the state paid this year. We were able to give bonuses and retention bonuses and frontline bonuses over the years that I've been here because we had additional funding through ARPA. Updated educational requirements for recruitment and retention. When we looked at the vacancy rate, we looked back at what is causing us not to get employees in certain labor level positions. So we went back and we looked at the educational requirements. So we were able to change some of the educational requirements if they had certain years of service for certain positions, as well as certifications in those areas. And so we've been able to do that, as well as having workforce development. And we have some of our employees who are now going to get their GED and their CDL license. So that has increased or allowed us to reduce our vacancies. Again, continuous development of coherent strategies surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you know, we as an organization have been working with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we are continuing to do that as we move forward. Improve uniformity. We are working together as a structured organization now. And you'll see our trucks, our vehicles, our uniformities, our uniforms, we are moving as one team with our employees now. Increased safety measures, again, that all comes with training and being able to identify areas of need where we need to increase safety, and we are doing that together collectively. Improve employee morale by creating fairness and equity in the workplace. That speaks for itself. Revamp the pay structure, class and pay plan to enhance fairness and competitiveness. What has the city currently done for fire? Address pay compression. Increase department staffing complement. You all know that they come before you and ask for additional positions, and we have been able to do that. I think my first year they asked for 17. My second year, I think they asked for 5. In this past budget, they increased it by an additional 5 for EMS. Revamp pay structure, class and pay plan to enhance fairness and competitiveness. That speaks for itself. Pay allowance increases in 2024 budget. So in other words, they have additional allowances for different steps or for different things that they do within the fire department that gives them an additional pay allowance. Career development, progression steps implemented for EMS paramedics. Now we have 1, 2s, and 3s. Those are progressive progression steps for our EMS, paramedic, and firefighters. Improve working conditions, fire and EMS facilities. We're constantly doing that, and we're doing that every day. We're finding what the needs are, and we're actually addressing those. City-funded VRS health and lung benefits. We as a city has funded that. The firefighters came to council, asked for that request. The chief brought that request before me doing budget deliberations, and we added that as part of the funded benefit for EMS. Options to use city or civil service commission grievance procedures. Currently, if there is a grievance, you can go to the civil service and you have that commission, and or you can go through the city grievance procedures. Right now, I think 99% use the city's grievance practice and procedure. They don't really use civil service. I think it's a little more aggressive than they want. So they use the cities. What is the current, what are we still currently divided? We increased fleet. Fire EMS apparatuses. We got a new fire engine. We got that in June. A new medic arrived in May. We had another new medic that will be arriving this month or next month. Another one, December 2024, because of the length of time it takes to build these apparatuses. We have another one that's coming in the fall of 2024. We have a new aerial ladder that's coming in 2024. Community response team vehicle arrived in April. Remember, BHS funded that for that vehicle. 2 battalion command vehicles, they were ordered in October. What was the city, and I want to go back to this real quick. I remember there being a conversation where fire came up and said they were having to borrow vehicles. Council heard that issue and council addressed it with the budget. What is the city currently providing for fire, health, and safety initiatives? Mr. O'Connor talked about grant funding. We've actually addressed that. There's some cancer screening funding for grants. The fire chief is always, plus always some more, going after grant funding to cover the cost so it would not be an impact on the city. Traffic control signals, I mean, the list goes on with grants. And this year, we shared with you the 911 Emergency Medical Dispatch Center accreditation we received, the Crisis Intervention Training Program. We actually created a training area, a training center at social services, so they don't have to go to different sites to have their training. I think they were at the Safety Town. So now they have an area for their training at Department of Social Services. Peer accreditation, they've submitted that for Office of EMS Critical Incident Stress Management, and various fire facility improvements. Again, what are the operational impacts of having collective bargaining? Limited flexibility and reduces the ability to quickly respond. Loss of, and again, this is operational across the city. This is just not fire, because again, we have public safety, we have services we provide to all of our citizens. Loss of direct communication between supervisors and employees, because then you would have the union invested for arbitration. Under emphasis on seniority and the employment relationship. Again, seniority gets funded, I should say, versus the other people who are there. Seniority hits first. Unions can sometimes be viewed as adversarial. Peer-to-peer manipulation. Again, you have a situation, you don't join a union, you don't get the golden ticket, and there are some other things that come to dealing with peer-to-peer manipulation, and you have to pay into your dues. Will require layers of review and new formalities. I think we've all heard that several times by the different attorneys, and in sessions. Increased operational cost. Our financial advisor has already provided that information. Creation of new positions specific to collective bargaining. We've seen that and heard that presentation, and we all are aware of that need. An increase in wages and benefits for employees. Again, there may be some additional pension costs associated with wanting to become a union, labor collective bargaining. I think we've touched on that and what we already are paying into our retirement system, but I know things like that come up as part of a bargaining mechanism. Increase in payroll costs and expenses. Those things you will definitely see over time, but again, across the board, all of our employees, we're working with that now. And that concludes my presentation, and I am open for questions.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Two issues. You brought up dues payment. Who determines the amount of dues?
I would think the union. The union.
The union determines that, okay.
Yes.
And also, I would like to hear from the chief of police and the fire chief in regards to the impact of unionization on their position.
Do we mind if we do that tonight, since you all have to make a determination?
I don't mind if they're going to be available at the later meeting. That's fine.
At 7 o'clock?
Which I wanted to hear from them, tonight, either here or the later meeting.
Chief Nestor. Okay. Does that please counsel? I don't want to step out of line.
I think it's important to hear a viewpoint from the chief if the councilman has made a request. I don't see a problem with it.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, and Dr. Whitaker, could you ask your question again, please?
Yes. As far as unionization, how would that impact your position as chief as far as any hiring, recruitment, discipline, paying, salaries? How would you be impacted in your managerial role?
Yeah, so what I know about the preparation for collective bargaining, and I understand that it's just the first step that's coming forward. So I would have to guess, or I'd be saying a guess on what the impact is, because some contracts out there in Virginia for fire departments will exclude certain areas, right? So there are areas that can be excluded that would not affect my ability to hire or promote, whatever it is, because it would just maintain the administrative policy of the city. So to say if it's going to negative impact me, that's up in the negotiation side. So that's really the best answer that I could give you.
So you're saying you're not able to answer that until when?
Yeah, so when the rules of engagement are decided, my assumption is with council and city, because you all have to decide what is part of the collective bargaining agreement. So there's a portion with compensation and benefits, but also there's a portion there when it comes to the administration of the organization itself.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Tillage, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad to hear that there's been so many advancements made in the fire department and across citywide. My question is in regards to the career development progression steps implemented by EMS, EMT 1, 2, 3, and firefighters 1, 2, and 3. Have those paramedics, and firefighters 2 and 3 been notified of their new step increases? And if so, how many were able to move up to those levels?
So those came with the budget. So council adopted the budget in 2024 for those grades and changes. So based on the promotional process, those, at that point, they will be notified based on the promotional process within the department. But Chief Nestor can speak to that.
Yeah, I can address that. Yeah, so we just finished the policy, internal policy on making those appointments, because it's a non-competitive appointment. Basic is years in service and certain certification requirements. And we had to base it off of the job description for each one. So we worked with an internal team of personnel led by battalion chief. We had the local 539 representation. We had other people that were involved with the process itself, what they were going to gain in it, and so forth. So with everything else going on with budget, it's still on my desk, but that is a priority to get done by the first of this year to make sure that we can make the next level of career steps, which will be EMS paramedic 2s and firefighter 2s.
Gotcha. So the policy has been drafted and created, it just hasn't been implemented just yet, per se?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Gotcha.
But I do want to just remind everybody, we did have GWIs, which was the 7%, and we did do the comp compression pay for fire as well.
Chief?
Before the chief of police can our fire chief come back? I have a question.
Okay.
And
Yes, sir.
this is an inquiry as well. Was there a vote of no confidence taken against you?
Yes, sir.
Was that by the union?
Yes, sir.
And so you don't foresee unionizing is going to cause a negative impact on you?
Well, as far as the working relationship that we have today,
Right.
that to me, that's in the past.
It's interesting that you got a vote of no confidence within the context of you diversifying the fire department historically at numbers that we had not seen previously. And so I don't like to play games, and I think that needs to be very transparent in regards to what we're about to do. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor. Well,
had no question.
Chief, okay, Chief, would you go ahead, I'm sorry, and then I'll entertain Councilman Hugo, and then Dr. Whitaker, you still want to?
Oh, no, that's it.
Okay, yes, sir. Chief, please.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council, Madam City Manager, Madam City Attorney. So, you know me, I don't mix words too much when I come up here. So obviously, as a police chief, I do have some concerns about collective bargaining and its implementation as it relates to my ability to be able to address issues within my organization. And so, you know, obviously, I've heard a lot of the presentation so far as the options that are given to council if put into the language early on, which offers some comfort. However, that information definitely needs to be spelled out clearly and defining, because again, for my standpoint, I see it as a potential adversarial position with the already sometimes challenging environment. The other thing that I would also like to highlight is that I think that one of the main issues that we've been discussing over the course of time, and again, I'm an internal person here, so I'm not going to stand here and act as if I don't know a lot of what public safety has dealt with over the years, and that is consistent and fair pay raises over the time. So I think if we took the time to come up with a comprehensive pay plan and then fully implemented it on a regular basis, if nothing but every other year in increments, I think that a lot of this conversation would be done with. Lastly, I want to highlight that, again, you've not seen any police officers up here for this conversation. We are, again, very much in support of our fire department and the job that we do as public safety. But when it comes to the conversation of collective bargaining, I have not had much conversation with people that work within my organization concerning it. And I have brought it up most recently as last week in a public forum with supervisors. So again, there's a lot of information that is unknown, and I think it definitely needs to have a lot more conversation so that we as leaders of within the city, department heads, have the ability to manage our organizations properly.
Thank you, Chief. Admiral, Councilman Hugo, you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So to the interim city manager, I appreciate the additional information tonight. I particularly appreciate the laundry list of good things that you and your team, including both chiefs, have done for our employees. And the list of those things during your time that we saw tonight is long and impressive. And it speaks to the concern that you and your team show to take care of the people who are serving the city. And so I appreciate that. We don't agree on a whole lot of things up here on the dais, but I think one of the things we do agree with you on is if we don't take care of our people, then the city isn't going to run the way the city needs to run. And so we have been supportive of the things that you listed on your laundry list. I guess I would point out, though, how did the list get so long of unaccomplished things on behalf of our people? How did the list get so long of the equipment that we needed and we weren't in the process of procuring until you took that aboard, really till we took that aboard and got after the problem. And so I asked Mr. O'Connor about the benefit from his perspective of collective bargaining, and the thing that he spoke to was consistency in engaging with leaders. Well, the fact is, city leadership hasn't had a lot of consistency at the city manager level. City leadership attitudes haven't been consistent from one city council to the next. And so right now, we have a city manager who cares to make sure that we're taking care of our folks, and a city council that supports the city manager to do that. But it wasn't that way apparently before. If it was, we wouldn't have had a laundry list of things that needed to be addressed over this past year. And so to Mr. O'Connor's point, someday you're not going to be the city manager, someday I'm not going to be the city councilman, someday they're going to be dealing, our employees, are going to be dealing with a new set of leadership. And if that group doesn't care the way this group cares about taking care of our folks, then there won't be consistency, and we will have pay compression reoccur, and we will fall down in the pay that we're offering to our employees compared to other folks in the region. And so therefore, in my opinion, one of the benefits, and I heard it from our union representative, is this consistency issue, because it won't matter that you're not the city manager and I'm not the city councilman anymore if we have a collective bargaining agreement that at least provides some stability across the period of the collective bargaining agreement. Now, Dr. Whitaker asked the chiefs for their opinions, and I appreciate both of their opinions, and it's really important to hear from them. I appreciated particularly Chief Magabet's honesty in saying, well, what's the impact to me? It depends on what gets written into the collective bargaining agreement, because if it gets written wrong, then the impact to the leadership in the city could be enormous, which goes back to, we can't do this if we aren't committed to doing it right. And so we just got to do it right. We got to put the time in. We got to think of the scenarios. Could you put your last slide up, please, the impact slide?
And after you finish, I do want to say
Yes, ma'am. So I want to talk to this impact slide, because I got a little bit of experience in a collective bargaining environment right down the street. So I want to share with the public my experience on these bullets. Okay, limited flexibility and reduces the ability to quickly respond. I can guarantee you that the United States Navy isn't going to put up with a lack of response from one of their nuclear shipyards, even though I had half a dozen unions that every single one had their own collective bargaining agreement with shipyard leadership. And so you do it right, there's a way to fix that. The next one, loss of direct communication between supervisors and employees. That's crazy, okay? It's crazy. Now, do the union leaders have a seat at the table and therefore a voice on behalf of the workers? They absolutely do. That's kind of the whole point. So part of this is figuring out who are the supervisors and who are the workers, and therefore who's in the collective bargaining agreement and who's not, and then making sure that the leadership team reinforces to our supervisors, hey, just because your folks are union employees, the fact is the firefighters right now, they're already union employees. And we don't have that problem. Well, maybe we do, but we don't have to have that problem if we have communicated to our supervision, we expect engagement between the supervisors and the employees, and the engagement cannot be, sit down and do it the way I told you because I told you so. Because that kind of behavior leads to people driving trash trucks down narrow alleyways and nobody telling you that it's a problem until you go out and follow the trash truck down the narrow alleyway and figure out this is dumber than dirt. Now, why did the city manager have to find that problem instead of let us listen to to the poor lady who's driving the trash truck every week down the narrow alleyway and risking bumping into cars and fences and everything else, all the stuff that we talked about when we watched that happening. Why didn't they bring those issues forward? Well, I don't know, but the fact that you had to go do the process improvement by going out and looking at it yourself, in my opinion, is a big problem, because we can't afford to have the city manager be the only person in the city government that's figuring out what processes we need to improve. Okay, next bullet, overemphasis on seniority. The fact is we're decompressing pay because we weren't paying for experience. Now, you can call experience seniority if you want to, but the fact is the only way you get a police officer that's got 10 years of experience is to hire him 10 years ago. And when he walks out the door, that 10 years of experience is impossible to replace. Next item.
Sir, excuse me. We, if you could condense it a little bit?
Yep.
Because, you know, we're
Okay,
running short on time.
so unions can be adversarial? Absolutely they can, part of the deal. But the fact is, we've seen some social media behavior from the firefighter union that kind of irritated us. They shouldn't have to go to social media to complain that we aren't taking care of the number of ambulances. They ought to have a seat at the table so we can have the discussion. Peer-to-peer manipulation, I'm not even sure what that means. Requires layers of review and new formalities. Absolutely, that's true. That's the investment that we're going to have to make to figure out how do we do collective bargaining the right way and fairly, and there is an investment. Now, I've heard folks up here say millions and millions of dollars. So Fairfax County set aside $1 million to implement collective bargaining, and they have many more employees than we have. City of Alexandria set aside $850,000 to implement collective bargaining.
To start the conversation.
Right,
So
it's not official.
that's to start the conversation to get the collective bargaining agreement in place. Once it's in place, you're right, we got care and feeding that we have to do with some labor relations staffing on your team that doesn't exist right now, but it's not dozens of people. I mean, in the shipyard, I had 7 times more employees than you got here in the city, and I had a pretty compact crew that took care of it, and believe me, it wasn't millions and millions of dollars. At least I don't think I paid them that. Increased operational costs, okay, maybe depending on how we negotiate salaries going forward. New positions, yep, you're right, labor relations people, we gotta have them. And increases in wages and benefits, maybe, okay, coming back to, we just fixed that. And so I wouldn't expect, and this is a shot across the bow for you union guys, I wouldn't expect that the first thing out of the starting blocks is gonna be, give us a 5% pay raise, because we just are giving them 7%, and that brings us back into the average band. And then the payroll costs and expenses, kind of the same argument. So we got to be careful if we're going to do this, that we do it right. I appreciate you listening to your concerns. Hey, I get it. This is a lot of extra work for you and your team that you don't have to do today, kind of. But the fact of the matter is, whether you do it formally or whether you do it informally by having to deal with the issues that are going on around the city, where your workforce is out there doing their hard work every single day, and some of them are doing it and saying, you know, there's a better way to do this job, but I can't seem to get anybody to listen to me, until the city manager goes out and sits down with those employees. That ain't the right place to have that discussion on how we get more efficient in the way we deliver services for our employees.
Sir?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So thanks, and thanks, Mayor.
Yes,
I'm done.
yes. Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, and I'll close it out. Then we have a motion for a closed session.
The city manager wants.
Madam, did you need to say something? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
I'm
but
sorry, go ahead.
I'm not going to take the whole
No, go ahead.
500 hours.
And let me just, can I preface something for the audience? If we could just pause for a minute. We normally start our meeting, of course, at 7 o'clock. This is a very important issue. It's very important to a lot of folks in the room. We want to make sure that everybody is heard and the appropriate information is shared. So that's why we're going to continue to move in that particular order. And once we're done, we're going to go into a closed session, and then we will return out for the regular open session at that time. Thank you.
So real quick, when I look out into the audience, I don't see other city employees. I only ever see fire. But I also can give you a laundry list of things that have happened for fire. Again, I'll just preface, I won't go through all these because I dare not. But we've come a long way. But why do we have to do this today? The reason I say that is because I gave you all top 10 things that we want to do or we want to start considering. We're already looking at a budget for '24. We're already looking at acquiring some infrastructure. We're already looking at acquiring or fixing the things, the basic things that we have neglected infrastructurally wise over the years. We have some heavy lifts coming up. We have additional things that we're doing for employees, for retirees, that we're trying to address. We're not in a state of lack, but we had to get right size first. One of the things we're looking at and that we've talked about is relief to our taxpayers. There has to be a point where you invest back into the people that are paying. Because again, without your citizens, you can't do any of this. Now that we finally got people realizing that Portsmouth does not own the casino, that has kind of calmed down. But we're looking for areas to develop to increase our revenue streams. Why are we taking all of our money out the kitty right now with the unknown? Because again, we're still talking about unknowns. We're still talking about what we have to produce, what we have to policy, procedure, blah, 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 blah. But we still have real things, priorities, competing priorities for the city. So do we take the money on the food out of the mouths of the people who are actually paying? They're not missing anything. And I don't want to say just fire across the board. We're catching up. Give us a time to breathe deep. And then once we get there, let's then look at what can we do to enhance to better. Again, you're right. There are going to be some changes. It happens. But if I don't get us where we can just do the basic, then adding another sprinkle of something that's going to create adversity, that's going to create issues, you're adding more. Again, collective bargaining, guess what? I could sit back and do nothing because every time I get a question or a need from one of the council, I can say, I'll have to get with the union, and we'll let the union determine what they can do. You can call me now. Citizens send me emails all day, and I can send out my people to do and get the work done, or at least to hurry up and follow up so I can give them some relief. There will be no deep breaths because I'll go into cardiac arrest before I can even help or get to that point. They're not lacking right now. It is definitely incumbent on this council to make sure that whoever is in my seat, whoever is on council continues this move. But let's invest in the people who are investing in us first. The citizens deserve a relief. And I don't want to take it from them before they can even get it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we can do both.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes.
Not today.
Yes, Madam
I'm sorry.
Interim City Manager, the chief was still up. I had another question
Which
for the
one?
chief of police.
Jenkins.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Chief, you have been mentioned by this council as being our top law enforcement person in the city.
Yes, sir.
You have been transparent with the citizens about our crime issue, and you have had forums where you have spoken, and you have the confidence of the community because of your forthrightness and because of how you have conducted yourself as chief of police. When I hear you stand up here and say that as our top law enforcer and also the crime issue we've been dealing with, and you state that the unionization of the police could cause issues with you in the management of your department. I don't see how we can just overlook that and say that, well, we need to put this in place to protect continuity. Well, I think we need to make sure that you're able and capable to do all you can to address the issues that citizens have been coming into our meetings and has been in the media about our crime issue. And I think for this council to undercut your management and what you do in that department is not only would be a disservice to you, but to our community. This issue is highly politicized because anytime you're talking about spending millions of dollars, and the shipyard is not exactly a good example to use as far as unionization and equity. But when we are talking about spending millions of dollars to do something that is already being done, I think that's irresponsible. I would like to hear from you now that the citizens are here, and I would like to hear you be a little more specific as far as your thoughts as to how unionization might would cripple what you do in a managerial role as the chief of police.
Yes, sir. So, again, I want to make sure that I highlight a couple of things. I've been in this city 21 years, and frankly, the city has been, over the course of time, has been very neglectful of its city employees. The men and women of the police department, fire department, and other city employees who have stayed over the years have done so, a lot of them out of loyalty, and loyalty not only to the city but to one another and to getting the job done. And so for them, the ones that have stayed and continue to remain, their hope with seeing what is taking place over the last several months is progression with the city. Understand that this is a very, very large ship to be able to turn on a dime. And so it doesn't turn overnight. But I think you see, and I can only speak for my part. We are now starting to see people come to the police department. We just had 69 applicants apply to the police department. We're hoping to send 25 individuals at the minimum to the police academy. So we are now starting to be able to see some things that are positive as it relates to my section of public safety and attracting people and the hopes of getting a police building, the hopes of better pay, better facilities, things of that nature. However, to get to the other side of that, collective bargaining does have the potential to make situations that we sometimes look at when we talk about issues of inclusion and diversity and things of that nature more difficult than it should be. Policies that we put in place to address certain issues now have to be scrutinized even more to ensure that you aren't not only violating federal policy, your own city policy and departmental policy, but now whatever unionized contract that you have in place to make sure that everybody, again, has some level of understanding and is pleased about it. The hopes of this, and again, I think there's a lot of this that can be handled if a comprehensive pay plan is put into place. And I understand as a city, we have not done that for a number of reasons. But the issue that I have, and many of folks that are in public safety especially, is when we did have a pay plan, you could see those things go by. And as one of the gentlemen came up and said earlier, But of course, we were in a different financial situation at the time. So you would see those steps go by and no raise. And so 5 years later, we look up and I know I'm supposed to be there, but I'm not. And the person that I went to a regional academy with, they're now making $5,000 to $10,000 more than me. That is an issue. But we today are in a lot better place. We're competitive. We understand. I think this city realizes that in order to attract and obtain the best and brightest, we're going to have to pay. We're going to have to compensate folks in that manner. We're going to have to provide better facilities. We're going to have to do those things that are necessary. My fear is that individuals that I have in my organization that I'm now starting to be able to get to buy into the progression that we are making, we're going to possibly step back because I'm adding an additional layer that sometimes may not be necessary. And again, I've had some conversation with other chiefs across the country. Most recently was in September as it relates to collective bargaining, those ones that actually have it. We don't know what that looks like. I do say if we're going to take the utilization of the clause, I think every opportunity should be put into that to ensure that we don't paint ourselves and the leaders who are charged with running this ship, paint them into a box where they're not able to do what they need to do when they need to do it.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief. I'm more concerned about us putting the money into the people versus polity. And so I thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. My response was going to be to the city manager, but she sits right next to me, so she doesn't need to go back to the lectern. But she spoke of the unknown, and I think Councilman Hugel touched on this. The people that deal with the unknown, some of them are sitting in the audience tonight. When our firefighters respond to a call, they're dealing with the unknown. When the Chief Jenkins police officers respond to a call, they're also dealing with the unknown. And every time a city manager changes, every time a council changes, those folks are dealing with the unknown when it comes to their financial stability. I've sat here a number of years and seen years where, yes, every year we haven't had a Ms. Terry that proposed a 7% increase. Stop and think, next year is an election. More than likely we'll have some different council members. So once again, the people that we rely on to protect our lives will be dealing with the unknown. Not only will they be dealing with the unknown, their families will be dealing with the unknown. So that's not right. And the chief just said, we're gonna have to. Well, you know, gonna have to doesn't always prevail with a new council and a new city manager. Gonna have to sometimes leaves town. And these people are left to come to this council and beg for, and beg is the proper word, beg for a salary increase. I've seen it for a number of years. It's not right. We need some consistency. I think that was what Councilman Hugel said, consistency. We haven't had it. We need it. And that's all I'm going to say on this subject. Thank you.
Okay, before we go into close, I have one more comment to make before we go and read our closed session motion. You know, we've sat here and listened to a lot of information. I think to my colleague, Councilman Hugel, you know, when we're comparing Portsmouth to the shipyard, when we're asking questions of behavior of our union representatives, and making statements that they shouldn't have to do that, we should all act responsibly, 100%. And so in acting responsibly, I think we have to look at this in a comprehensive way. No one, let me be clear, because I know how the firefighter union has acted, and I know how when you don't support them, they have acted. They have acted in an unprofessional way, and I've had to go to the president and ask him personally not to put my face and my name on Facebook, and to ask his people not to do that. I say that because in any situation, whether you have collective bargaining or not, there are going to be personalities, there are going to be negotiations, and guess what? That is the real world. Collective bargaining no more makes it a better situation than before. And yes, I hear the argument that it is a contract. Well, guess what? Contracts get broken every day. People grieve contracts every day. The fact of the matter is, you may not want a contract that you can't get out of. And I'm not speaking in favor or against, but as the mayor, the elected leader of this city, who I ran, and I've worked in this city, I've paid the dues, and many of us have up here, but I support the citizens of this city. And I'll share this with you. I was asked by the president of the union the other night at an event, do you support us? And you know what I shared with him? I said, I support the citizens of the city of Portsmouth. And to the day I die, I will continue to support the citizens of the city of Portsmouth. And so if that means that you feel a certain way, we're one team, we're one family, this council is going to make a decision. It's going to be a decision. Before we make it, we all need to understand that it is one that we all must live with. And it's not going to be an easy way if you don't agree with the way people behave, with the way that people conduct themselves, because that's just the way it is. So I wanted to be clear, Mayor Glover isn't against anybody. I'm actually for everybody. And I want us to consider to do the right thing that is in the best interest of the citizens of our city. That is all I had to say, and thank you for listening. Would you please read the closed session? Oh, Ms. Terry, I'm sorry. Go ahead, ma'am.
So I'm going to do this pretty briefly because I know you have a closed session. We have, I'll just say the report number, the grant amount, and the department. CMR 23-361 for $115,645 for adoption of a grant for the police department. 23-362, $20,540, adoption of the grant for the fire department. 23-363, $175,000, adoption of a grant for courts. 23-364, $27,592, adoption of a grant for behavioral health services. 23-365, $1.273783 million, adoption of a grant for BHS. 23-366, $16,065, adoption of a grant for BHS. 23-367, $25,280, adoption of a grant for BHS. 23-368, $294,852, adoption of a grant for BHS. 23-369, $40,000, adoption for a grant for BHS. 23-370, contract for the health department, the fiscal year 24 agreement. 23-371, adoption of a resolution for VDOT transportation commitment. That concludes my portion.
Thank you, ma'am. And Madam Vice Mayor, would you please read the closed session motion, please?
Yes. I move to go into a closed meeting A pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.8 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the city regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel specifically regarding collective bargaining. And B, pursuant to subsection 2.2-3711A.6 for the purpose of discussing or considering the investment of public funds where competition or bargaining is involved, where if made public initially, the financial interests of the governmental unit would be adversely affected, specifically regarding Hampton Roads Regional Jail. And C, pursuant to subsection 2.2-3711A.7 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel pertaining to actual litigation where such consultation in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the body, specifically regarding Swenson versus City of Portsmouth, Portsmouth Circuit Court Case Number CL 2300577-00.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Council members, would you please vote electronically? We're in closed session. Coming out of close, and so, Madam Vice Mayor, would you please read the motion?
Yes. I hereby move that each council member certify to the best of his or her knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting just concluded.
We have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would you please vote electronically?
This item is adopted 6-0.
That concludes our work session. We will take a 10-minute break, reconvene at 7:58.